what I think it is, but what do I, is it? I'm not convinced that it's anything other than product of the mind. So we could always start there. That's almost like the moral argument. You can never get enough discussion on that.
Okay, that sounds like a good place to start. The origin of consciousness. So I mean, the first question is consciousness independent of the brain?
I don't think so.
There you go. That solves that problem.
Yeah, I agree with what you were saying, James. Actually.
So it's okay. Well, I'll kind of let you know what he was saying, and maybe we can jump off because it's very diametrically opposed to what most people would even accept as well. That could be possible. He started out by saying that all I can't do it. I'm not convinced that it's anything other than product of the mind. So we could always start there.
Can't hear you very well, man.
You can never get enough discussion on that.
Okay, that sounds like a good place to start. The origin of consciousness. So I mean, the first question is consciousness.
You gotta mute the stream, man. Yeah, he's got to mute the stream. I just think that there's so much evidence these days about the way in which you just change certain parts of the brain, or and a person is completely altered in their conscious, subconscious, in their mind. The decisions they make, everything that is about them, their personality, all these types of things change if the structure of the brain is changed in some way, or at least that's what it seems to suggest.
That's exactly right, and that's a very good, valid discussion as to why the consciousness or who we are, personality, is intrinsically related to the actual fibers that are in our skull. If you take some of them out, you're a vastly different person. So it doesn't survive a massive brain hemorrhage. You can still function, but you lose your memory, you lose your belief systems at times, you lose inhibitions, you lose all kinds of things as you alter different. Even putting different chemicals into your brain alters those aspects of your personality.
Yeah, so to even define what a person's, I mean, if you're going to say that the conscience was separate from my mind, from my brain, I would have to first be able to determine exactly what it was or what its characteristics were, because if my mind was altered in some way and I was acting differently, surely that would be independent to my conscience, supposedly, if it was a extension, or, sorry, not an extension of the brain, rather. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely, and this is why the doctrine of the soul takes such a high place in a lot of the mystical type religions or anything that believes in an afterlife. They don't want to accept the fact that if you do anything to the core of who we are, that we're not the same person, and they can't believe that if your soul is this thing that God impregnated in with you and you got poofed into existence when the cells got together and started multiplying. If you lose that essence of who that conscious being is, then you'd start having to doubt. Well, do you have to get saved all over again? So there's so many other issues surrounding it. They just ignore it altogether. Well, it has to be something else, and there's no dialogue there.
I read somewhere an interesting case in the legal system where someone had a brain tumor and I think they killed someone, they committed murder, and they had a brain tumor, and then the brain tumor was subsequently removed, and they suffered from a complete personality change. And the argument was that if it wasn't for the brain tumor, he wouldn't have committed the murder. So I think he was allowed to be released. It's an interesting argument.
Well, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. I wasn't trying to, but it's I don't know what you guys did where you are, but North America had a history in the 20s and 30s of just taking people and scrambling their brains, and completely different people, and that they still do that. They still propose that for some pedophiles, like serial pedophiles. You're never going to get cured of that. 97% recidivity rate with a pedophile because it's something ingrained in them, and some people are actually starting to talk as pedophilia per se as just another expression of normal sexuality. I'm not sure I'm willing to go there, but they're putting it on the spectrum of bi, gay, whatever. It's just another aspect of our humanity. And to demonize it in that sense is basically all religious. Go ahead, Jeff. I'll stop talking for a while.
Oh no, that's okay. I just wanted to point out that this seems like the old mind-body duality question.
Absolutely.
Whether our minds are in our thinking and everything seem to be one and the same. And I tend to agree with you. It seems like the physical, what happens to the brain physically, often affects what we think, who we are, all these things that we attribute to being ourselves and having a consciousness. There are some that make the argument that those who do not favor who favor the duality argument of mind-body make the argument that that who we really are, our soul is like the piano player, and that if the piano's out of tune, it doesn't seem to, it doesn't affect who you are and all that. You just can't play the piano properly. I find this a stretch and a useful metaphor, but I don't see anything more solid than that to support that view. And it seems that to me that the evidence of the physical world and its effect on our brains seems to be inescapable. That's just my take on it.
Sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say, yeah, I always have a problem with most people's interpretation of a soul, especially, because what it ends up boiling down to, as far as I can always tell, as I ask more deeper questions, I sort of say, they might just say, "Oh, I can feel it in my soul," and I sort of ask them a bit further, what does that feel like? Can you try to describe that feeling for me? And every single time, it always seems to come back to a combination of, sounds, scents, potentially, emotions running in your mind. Putting yourself in a state of mind. A lot of people that do sort of meditation and stuff. You put yourself into a particular state of mind. You allow yourself to sort of experience certain other feelings, but that's not a soul. That's just you. It's just another facet of you that you're able to feel. I just never understand how they just jump to it. Oh, we're tapping this external thing here, rather than not seeing it as just an extension of, not an extension of themselves. It is an extension of themselves, but not like added on. It's still what the person is, if I'm making any sense.
But I think sometimes the word soul might be used as for convenience, because you do get into difficult dilemmas when you ask whether, for instance, a machine could ever become, well, how would you define self-aware or conscious in the same sense that a human can? That's another interesting question is, if you disassembled your brain and put it back together, assuming the technology one day exists to do that, or disassembled your brain such that you downloaded it into a computer, one atom at a time, would that be the same as transferring your consciousness, or would it just be duplicating?
Well, that depends if the mind is analog or digital.
I think there's I think when you look at the consciousness, I think we've taken that word and made it something far more than it really is, because we've never really been able to explain how it functions. I was trying to explain to Sport this morning when he told me that consciousness drives the cellular reproduction in a baby, and that the other night he said consciousness was actually responsible for cancer too. Now, I'm all for positive thinking and placebo effect and all of that too, but those aren't ethereal. Those are very concrete responses physiologically in your body. Your body will respond to that kind of a system. It just does. Placebo effect is. I'm a massage therapist, and a vast amount of what we do is making people feel better about themselves, and they get better. I mean, how Yes, I can manipulate tissue and do all kinds of things, and I'm trained in all of that. But probably 80% of what I do is get people to feel better about themselves, and miraculously their tension goes away and all that. You know what I mean? But we spiritualize that rather than realize that it's just a function of the synapses and the neurons, depending on what part of the brain it goes to, or it's a function of the limbic system, which is where our emotions are coming from. So when you tie the nervous system and the limbic system, you get programmable memory. You get all this ability to interrelate with people, and that's where all that stuff comes from. But when you start with this, because you can't explain it, therefore it's a spirit, therefore it's God, therefore it's whatever. As we learn more and more about neuroscience, we realize that we are, if you take my brain and put it into somebody else's body, and we were able to somehow reconnect all the fibers in my body, and I could use the new body, who I am would transfer to that new body, because it's my brain. The rest of my body is just my body. Everything is in my brain. So, anyway.
I think that's a really interesting thing you've just said, and I have a few questions for you on what you just said.
I will do my best.
Okay, well, firstly, do you think it's related to the idea of using a placebo to make people feel better?
Okay, yeah.
Slightly unrelated, but do you think it's ethical to prescribe people placebo pills? For instance, the NHS in the UK has got a lot of problems because people go to hospital for things like colds. Do you think it's ethical to prescribe people with a placebo pill? And my second question, I suppose, is if you had two brains that were identical to the atomic level, I mean, atoms basically are identical. There's no difference between them.
Yes, absolutely. Chemicals are all the same, and the neurons and everything functions exactly the same.
So in this case, would the two brains be the same person? I mean, that kind of doesn't make sense, does it? Because
it makes sense. The only way they would be the same person would be if they were to experience everything exactly the same. And what do you think the chances of that of happening are?
Every single factor, yeah, absolutely every single factor. Yeah, to do with the brain. So every nerve ending on their body, every absolutely fine detail. Yeah,
exactly the same way to have the exact same effect in the brain, and that's never going to happen. Which is why there's 7 billion personalities on the planet.
But surely, by that logic, you could argue that I'm not the same person that I was a second ago, considering that.
Actually, there's a lot of truth in what you just said. You do know that every 7 years, every cell in your body is reproduced, right?
Yeah, but
yeah. So you're not the same person you were 7 years ago. So why would you be the same person you were yesterday, or even 2 minutes ago, or 30 seconds ago when I started this sentence? Because you've acquired new information, and your brain is already processing it. So yes, you're different second by second.
So I would assume that it would. I would only have to assume that. Okay, if you were to create something in the future, like an exact replica, like it would have to. I feel external factors like a completely come into account. So atmospheric. If you're trying to replicate someone from like now 2014, and you're in 2056 or something. You're going to have to take into account absolutely like all those differences, but I still think that if you somehow threw that brain into that world, that yes, it would be exactly the same. I'd have to assume. I don't know why that's a problem with being different than you were a second ago.
I mean,
go ahead, Quantum.
I'm reminded of the philosophical problem with teleportation if it ever becomes a viable scientific technology, like in Star Trek, how you have people teleporting to different planets, and the opposition to that is that it's not actually your consciousness that's being transported, it's you being killed and then reassembled somewhere else, so with the memories that you had, so it's a completely different person. Or is that just a fallacy? Because actually,
right, I see what you're saying. No, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I'd like to.
Yeah.
If I may, I'm sorry if I'm on. I'm wondering if this isn't a little bit, and I'm just throwing this out there. Maybe part of this is the fallacy of composition. So we say about our cells that they replace themselves, and we have different cells every 7 years, and therefore we're always somebody different. I'm just wondering if that's not the, ascribing something to the whole that we subscribe to
The
attributes.
layman's explanation to a more deeper
Yeah, I'm not-
sort of understanding or theory. Is that what you sort of mean? Yeah.
So well, like we say, the parts of a tractor are all light and metallic. Therefore, the whole tractor is light and metallic, even though the whole tractor is heavy. That kind of thing. So because all the cells, the parts of the things that make us up replenish themselves every 7 years. Therefore, we get renewed every 7 years, or we become somebody else. I'm thinking that might be borderline on the composition error, that we really still are who we are, just because our attributes behave differently than they all do joined together. Does that make sense?
I didn't quite catch how you were tying it all together.
Well, again, like the fallacy of composition, as I understand it, is applying the attributes of the parts of something to the attributes of it in its entirety. Like let's say we say the parts of a tractor are all lightweight and made of multiple materials. Therefore, the whole tractor is lightweight and made of multiple materials. So in the same way, saying that because the cells replace themselves with new cells, therefore the entirety of the organism replaces itself in the same kind of way.
I see what you're saying. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying
Okay.
that at a cellular level, your body is replacing itself constantly. Every 7 years, like even bone tissue, the bones that you had 7 years ago are gone. They're the ones that take the longest. That's why the time frame is 7 years. Your skin goes every 2 or 3 weeks. You've got a whole new set of skin.
Right.
So that's all I'm talking about, and that's not the essence of who I am. This is just a
Okay.
cell, right?
Okay, so yes, our parts obviously transform and do replace one another. Arguably, I don't know, I'm not a physicist, so I defer to you, but arguably they kind of clone themselves, and whatever they do perpetuates our
into the structure of us. Like they keep doing, like they do it and remain us. Like
Mhm.
you know what I mean?
Well, the cells.
I think that's what he's sort of saying.
Yeah. You're talking about meiosis versus mitosis. Meiosis is cell A becomes a replicant of cell A, it becomes A again, whereas mitosis is sexual reproduction, where you're creating an entirely new entity. But once that's formed, it functions with meiosis. So that process just keeps renewing. That's the one that keeps going on. But it's the mitosis which produces the genetic differences that make every one of us unique.
Okay, gotcha.
So, if the technology did exist and you were to download your thoughts into a computer, would the computer then be you?
No, because my body is part of me. My consciousness does. I can't separate that. I'm not there yet. I can't make that leap. I would like to think. I would like to think that there's a way of making me into a machine that I could live forever, but I don't think that's ever going to happen, because I don't think of the consciousness is something you can't separate from the essence of the neurons that produce all the firings. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, he's sort of saying that the technology is probably never going to exist to be able to do that.
Probably not. And the reason, the main reason we can't live more than about 100 years is because that's the life expectancy of our neurons, like the actual nerve fibers. They're actually nerve cells. They live to be about 100, 120 years is about as max as they're going to go until they can figure out how to get themselves. They're the only things that don't replicate, which is why your brain, you don't become a new person mentally every 7 years, because those cells don't reproduce. They don't regenerate themselves, whereas all the rest of them do. So when we can figure out, and they're getting closer to how to regenerate the neurons, so that when they start to die, which is basically what happens when you're getting old, is they just start wearing out and dying. Once they can figure that out, then the process of keeping you physically alive is easy once the neurons don't degenerate. That's the thing that causes And of course, you're talking about telomeres as well, and they're working on those kind of things. But that's the essence of why we have a life expectancy. Ultimately, the neuron only lasts about 100 years. So if you live over 100 years, you're doing well. What don't you understand, Quantum?
Dr. Quantum has just posted a question about whether the mind is analog or digital. I don't really understand that point of view.
Is analog? My understanding of what he's asking is, in a digital mind, it would be on or off, whereas an analog mind is more open to receiving more information in the sensing site. I think that's what he's trying to refer to. But I don't believe it's an either or, and this is a lot of the dichotomy with when you start talking with religious people is it's A or B. There's no A1. It's on or off, and very, very narrow thinking in my perception of it anyhow.
I mean, but clearly the easiest solution to this problem of being able to download your consciousness into a machine and the implications that would have would be to say that the technology cannot exist for all these different reasons. I mean, if a technology can never exist, that's a really easy way to solve the problem. I mean, if that means that consciousness is inexorably tied to the brain and it cannot, I mean, even though some independent consciousness might exist in some other type of, I don't know, it might exist in some other organic matter or whatever. The fact is that your own consciousness is inexplicably tied to your brain and it cannot ever be removed. Is that sort of what you're getting at?
Again, because the way we perceive we're thinking, we can't see it, we can't feel it, we can't touch it, so we think it's something outside of ourselves, or we like to think it is. Whereas if you see it as if every time you have a sensation that activates a sensory nerve anywhere on your body, it's processed somewhere in the brain. So every time we either consciously or unconsciously react to whatever the stimulus is, that's our mind. However you want to define it beyond that, our memories are stored in our brain, our feelings are in a different, they're in the limbic system, our cerebellum processes proprioception, the ability to, and pain, they're all different aspects of what our body does all by itself. Sometimes we're aware of it, sometimes we're not. Like you can't necessarily make your heart go faster. Some people can, some people can't. That's the point of meditation, learning how to tap into that autonomic system. And that's, again, a function of just the essence of what the brain can do. So
I think it's evident though that it would hang on, I've lost it. Carry on what you're saying. I'll speak if I remember.
If I could just jump in with my layperson's knowledge of of science, I was thinking if what we're talking about uploading into a computer would be consciousness, self-awareness, and things like that, those seem to be emergent properties from biological organisms, cells, and you can name it better than I'm sure. So we. Are we talking about just putting data into a computer, and if so, how does that get you to consciousness? I mean, clearly we could maybe replicate many of the functions of human beings, including a lot of reasoning processes as we know, but I'm just wondering how, what this means when we talk about uploading our consciousness to a computer. Is it just electrical signals and binary data, as somebody asked, or is it or digital data, I should say?
Right. So when you talk about things like artificial intelligence, as the field of study grows, we realize more and more how little our brain doesn't work like that. Does that make any sense? Like, our brain literally does work. A process, B, bang, we have a reaction. It isn't much more complicated than that, but because we have this appearance or a sense that what we think and what we feel is so vastly separate from what we see in the mirror, we put that into the mix and go, is much more than that. And you get guys like Deepak who who knows what the hell he's talking about now, but you come up with concepts that try to explain that connection or lack thereof, and the reality of it is as we create artificial intelligence, they will be able to replicate how we function to a greater and greater extent. So if you're saying, can we become that? Well, there are people who are proposing that the next evolution of humanity is that we will become more and more mechanized as we can replace arms and things. And so you're talking a whole other field of study. But if we see our brain functioning as just the brain and take away the I'll call it woo for the lack of a better word, where woo, I mean anything, we're outside of ourselves, we're beyond the confine of the brain, of the skull. If the brain is just that, then that's all there is, and that's all it is. And the more we do research, the more we find it, we are just a compilation of the way our brain processes. That's why we're a little bit different than the rest of the mammals, who have almost exactly the same emotions that we do. They just process things a little different because of the frontal cortex. That's the basic difference between a lot of them and us. We have a higher ability to process. That's about it.
I think, oh sorry, but with what quantum you were saying before, it couldn't be us, because I mean, if you were to copy my brain, if we had the technology right now, assume so, and you were to copy my mind and produce it however it was replicatable, I would be able to watch this all take place and I could see it there. So it wouldn't be me based on that. Does that make sense? I think that maybe then leads to suggest that you are not the same as you were a second ago. I don't know.
Well, clearly some of these thought experiments can lead you to ridiculous ideas. I mean, for instance, if you could download consciousness into a machine and you could do it more than once, then you could download two copies of your own consciousness into two machines at the same time, and then for some reason there'd be some sort of information transfer between them, because you'd be conscious in both, and then you could separate them by a vast distance, where of course the information can only travel at the speed of light, so you'd end up with a paradox. It can't possibly work because nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. So,
I think you just blew my fucking mind right there.
Well, a couple of things. I think you can define the question in such a way that it presupposes the conclusion. So if we say, can I download myself into a computer, and then would that be me? It would obviously be me under that scenario. But really, the things about, and maybe this gets into free will too. But
let me jump in real quick. I want to address what you just said. Okay.
Okay.
We've uploaded us into a computer, me into a computer. Okay. At that precise moment when the downloading is finished, the new piece of me becomes its own entity because it experiences life all by itself. So it's not me anymore. It starts out as what I was, and it becomes something totally different. That's
the different.
Does that make sense?
So
because
it's
experiences
like
it differently than I do, so I could never run into another exact duplicate of me.
That actually sounds exactly like the problem with quantum teleportation, actually.
Explain that.
Well, if the scientists, they say that if you teleport a person by quantum teleportation, you will not be teleported. It will only create a copy of you and everything about you, but you will actually be destroyed. So it's kind of the same thing.
Okay.
It will be a new entity.
That's the Star Trek transporter, as I understand it.
So that's why Bones hates it.
Yeah.
That's why Bones hates it, because it destroys him every time it sends him somewhere.
There's a new Captain Kirk every time. Or Captain Picard, depending how old you are.
Yes, exactly.
Every time there's a transporter episode.
Well, that's just it. It's exactly it, and it's the same. It's the same idea of what you're talking about, of uploading me into a computer. As soon as that machine gets turned on, it becomes me 1A. It's not me, but it's me, but it's not, because it doesn't experience anything as the same way that I do. So it's something completely different. So this is why the whole aspect of a soul makes no sense. It just doesn't. There isn't this thing that exists beyond me. It's just me.
Right.
So do I have to accept then that I am basically ceasing to exist all the time, and I just have the memories of the previous me?
No. Well, no, because your brain isn't reproducing itself. Yeah, the rest of your cells are, but the brain doesn't have that functionality.
You're being kept running. You're being kept running. The power to your processor, it's not been shut down. You know, when you die, the power to everything's shut down.
That's
so
right.
Everything that's been stored disappears. I mean, that's how I see it anyway. It's like someone's flicked the power switch off. You know.
Okay, here's another thought experiment then. If one of you were to kill me now, and then reassemble me 300 years in the future when you...
I thought about this. Anyway, carry on.
Okay, so
I'm killing you.
I think you know where this is going anyway. But if you were to kill me now and then reassemble me in the future exactly how I was, would I wake up?
Oh, that is the Walt Disney experiment, I call it.
And if you were to just do that, the reality is probably it wouldn't be you at this moment in time, because as soon as the brain stops functioning, it dies. And unless you can revitalize the brain, and even after people who have had near-death experiences, they're very often people who have been clinically dead and been brought back. Functionality of the brain is always affected. Personality is always affected.
Right.
It never comes back the way it was, because cells die, and that's just a fact. And that's why brain death is death. It doesn't matter. The rest of the body can be replaced, but once the brain dies, you're dead.
And not to go too far afield, but how do you feel about like the idea of cryogenics or literally suspended animation?
Answer is the same.
Okay.
Yeah, because I was about to say that things like I don't know, just think about just socializing. I mean, if you don't do a lot of socializing after a while, you sort of feel uncomfortable about socializing. It's like as if you forgot how to do it. That's a bit of, you know, if you're going to freeze someone and they're not going to be doing anything, not walking, not talking, not breathing, you know, all these sorts of things. Well, maybe not breathing, that's probably more autonomic, but all these other things, behaviors and things that we do, once you stop doing them, or your brain will just, you know, if you just kept the brain sort of ticking and shut everything else off, the brain will just sort of...
presumably nothing is... like if you could literally stop time as far as the brain is concerned, which I know is maybe I'm defining something into existence too, but I think certainly one can imagine that being frozen for 100 years would be a bit disorienting, to say the least. But I mean, is it possible to resume? And if we had the technology to just take the pause on somebody, I don't know, just throwing stuff out there. But anyway,
I'm not too sure.
I don't mean to change the subject now, but at the beginning, I forget who said it, was going to define the emergence of consciousness or something of that nature, if I heard correctly. If so, I think that sounds really interesting. I hope we don't forget to do that.
That was the premise we started with, was the origin of consciousness.
This is what this conversation spawned from, yeah. Yes. The origin of consciousness.
Yeah, and I mean, we can, you know, I'm not the moderator, but I would be interested in hearing that case that you make. You seem to indicate you have a theory about the origin of consciousness, and I think that would be interesting too to talk about. But we can continue on this thread. I just didn't want to forget that. I should have put it in the sidebar rather than.
But don't worry about it. Go on whatever thread you think is natural. It's fine.
Well, I would be interested in hearing about what the theory is about the origin of consciousness that you were seem to
Well, I think I was just sort of just making it just separating the difference between an emerging consciousness and like a divinely inputted one, or like some sort of external thing that's inputted there and you can remove and whatnot.
That's right.
I'm not entirely sure how consciousness does emerge. I mean, I've read bits and pieces of psychology and stuff like that, but not a lot. I've studied a little bit of it. I'm still an undergraduate student, but from what I can understand, I just there's more evidence to suggest that it's from our brains, from nature, rather than anything else. Apart from that, yeah, I don't have anything.
I gotcha. I kind of didn't really think that you had an entire theory of consciousness as such, because I don't think that's forthcoming.
If I did, then I would be wrong. Because
let me try and get you.
Well, that doesn't mean you're wrong. It would be new. It'd be quite exciting.
Yes, that's correct. I could, by some miracle, be right. Yeah.
Let me try and paint a picture for you, Jeff. I'm not going to call it a theory because I actually respect that word too much.
Right.
At some point in the past 3-4 point whatever billion years that life has been on this planet, it grew to a point where we became creatures with brain functioning, and in that moment that we started having something that was processing information. True consciousness became awareness of your environment. So if you think, when you use the term consciousness, that's a loaded term, and this is, I think, for me, this is where a lot of the issues come from, and this is why it's really tough to talk to a theist about this, because they equate consciousness with soul. But if you're talking about consciousness as being just an ability to be aware of who you are in your surroundings, then anything that has a brain has a consciousness. So that, to me, that's the origin of it. As soon as some cell body somewhere back in our evolutionary past required processing power, and the system developed, and suddenly A became a response to B, that's the beginning of consciousness. And I can't see it as anything more than that. And we just happen to have an evolved form of that system going on in our brains.
Can I interrupt you for 1 sec?
Please, go ahead.
Actually, I think not to sound rude or anything, but I think you are using the word consciousness wrong. I think when we talk about animals, we talk about they are conscious. Conscious is awareness about your environment and things around you, but consciousness is awareness about yourself.
Consciousness, how I determine consciousness is, it's like, to me, it's like philosophy.
Yeah.
It's like a bunch of different words that we've created to explain shit we can't explain. We put a term called consciousness on something that is conscious. So it's a manufactured term that really, that's the origin of consciousness, is we've invented it.
Yeah, I know, but it was just for people who might be listening.
That. You're right. Thanks for clarifying what I was trying to say.
I feel like it could almost be, though, sort of a byproduct of things like, retention. Retaining information's a very useful thing. To be able to access information that you had previously. Learning, I suppose, animals sort of have that as well. But to be able to sort of critically do it with your mind, to also foresee potential events, predict things.
Yeah.
All these things are they're advantageous, and I think that there's no reason to suggest that our brains evolved. It's clear that our brains have evolved just probably more than any other part of our human body over our time period that we can see, and so I think, I don't know, it could just be what we've defined and bracketed in as consciousness is just a varying array of things that have become advantageous, and we use them in different ways today than we don't have a lot of survival sort of restraints or impacts on us anymore as what we used to. So some of these things sort of take different paths. But yeah, I don't know. That was just me spewing.
No, you're right. You're
You know, I'd
absolutely
like
right. And that's how our brains develop, and that's the point of evolutionary pressures. Animals have memory, not maybe some more than us in some things and some less than us, but we all have that ability. That's one of the things that makes humans different, is we can recall stuff. That's a process of our frontal lobes and stuff, right? Go ahead, Jeff. I know you're trying to say something.
Well, I was just going to... I don't think in terms of consciousness... I don't think consciousness as such is that different from living organisms, or necessarily that human beings have better consciousness as many animals. I mean, animals can perceive things that that we can't perceive, and so forth. They have heightened hearing and other sensory. You know, they can sense. Dogs can hear things that we can't hear, and so forth. But what makes us different is not so much the consciousness. We differ in our abilities and in the ways in which we perceive reality. But where human beings, of course, differ is that we can, in very elaborate ways, conceptualize that data that we get from our senses, and in ways that animals seem unable to do or not able to do in a nearly advanced kind of way. So the consciousness seems kind of the same to me. It's an awareness of reality. Maybe not as much a self-awareness, although I do notice my cats, this is anecdotal obviously, they look at their reflection in the mirror and they don't immediately attack the reflection. They kind of know it's them, so they seem to have some self-awareness. That's maybe not too scientific, but...
that's a good example.
Yeah.
You're right in the sense that I'm consciousness is such a loaded word. If you ever want to understand why this is such an important issue, I mean, it seems so easy to understand this. I mean, it's really not difficult. There's lots of nice big words and stuff we can talk about, but realistically, this isn't a difficult situation. What happens is when you have one aspect of our society telling us that we're a special, unique creation, and if you ever want to test it, go into a room of theists and say we're not at the top of the food chain, and see what they say. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have railed on me for making that statement, because we're not at the top of the chain. We're not at the top of the evolutionary scale. We aren't the best. We have some of the worst eyesight of all the animals that have eyes. We have really bad eyes. We have a terrible sense of smell. We have a lousy sense of hearing. Our taste is terrible. But we are the best top of the line species. We're the top of bullshit. We've evolved to the pressures that have been placed upon us to be who we are. That's all there is, and that's what we have. So anyway, that's a fun discussion. If you ever want to get into that with a group of theists, ask them that question.
I think
I've been in discussions like that with theists, and I know they can be lots of fun. Actually, it depends on the theist. Sometimes they can be fun.
Yeah, that's the argument Sporty and I are having right now.
Yeah, one of the... I'm sorry, somebody was... Let me just... One of these things about when we talk about consciousness, it seems to me like from my sort of orientation and philosophy was you get down to certain axioms that really can't be broken down further. Like it's really hard to break existence down further without citing things that exist. And of course, when we talk about existence, we exist, and we're asking people to recognize things about reality, and consciousness is kind of the same way. So I think one of the things early on in
this is an axiom. Sorry.
Yeah, or free will. You know, like try talking about well, you don't have free will. Well, you know, I'm telling you shouldn't believe in free will, and that you would have the free will to make those decisions. So I think we do have a certain degree of free will, because any sort of attempt to deny it kind of proves it. But
can I just quickly jump in if possible, because you were talking about evolution, which I think is quite an interesting point. Do you think there's much of a difference between consciousness and self-awareness? I ask this because there's I've recently done a little bit of home-style research on self-awareness in animals, and it's actually a relatively rare trait. As far as I can tell, the only self-aware animals are most of the great apes are self-aware. Killer whale, dolphins.
Yeah, the higher mammals.
Yes, and also, funnily enough, the European magpie and the elephant, they're all self-aware. So I mean,
Rules too.
yeah, it's odd. I mean, I don't really know why the magpie is but the magpie passes the mirror test. I mean, to clarify, the mirror test is they put a dot on the animal, and then the animal looks at the mirror and it sees the dot, so it tries to brush the dot off. It's the ability to recognise yourself in the mirror, which is one way of testing for self-awareness. But the interesting thing is that if we look at the evolutionary timeline, we're quite well separated from, well, magpies. We're definitely well separated from magpies, and we're also well separated from the likes of dolphins. Not so much the apes, but it's odd then that self-awareness has developed, and dolphins have the grasp that the dolphins have of language and the way that they behave. Because I mean, children don't pass the mirror test originally; they have to learn how to pass it, and they have to become self-aware. I mean, a 1-year-old child is not yet self-aware. But the interesting thing is that young dolphins behave in virtually the same way that a young human child would behave. And the interesting thing about that is that despite the fact that we've been separated from dolphins by millions of years of evolution, we still share extremely similar traits in cognitive ability. That can't just be a coincidence, surely.
It's not a coincidence. Our brains are developed very similar in many ways, as through the process of becoming who we are. Our brains went through a period of time where it diverged from the dolphin. It's not that hard to. And anyway, it's clear in my mind that we've retained that same characteristic. I honestly don't even believe we're the smartest animal on the planet. I would go that far, because we're destroying it. How ignorant can we be to live on a planet that sustains us, and yet we spend all our time trying to kill it? That's not smart. So I think most of the animals are waiting for us to die.
That could dovetail into a political discussion.
Yeah, it can.
Quite easily.
Do you think dolphins are smarter than people? Because I mean, I think the only realistic candidate for something being smarter than a human is the dolphin. I don't think any of the great apes are realistically as smart as people. Although actually some animals do have significantly better memories than humans.
Well, I would say any animal that isn't trying to destroy the planet is smarter than us, but that might be generalizing too much.
But it's not intelligent.
Slippery slope, because you got to define intelligence, and you got to define, it's really hard to do that, I find it.
I get your point, Mordred, but in the general context that most people would associate intelligence with, we are extremely intelligent in terms of our cognitive ability. But I don't think it's reasonable to say that just because we have self-destructive tendencies that we're not intelligent. I mean, look at the most successful organism on the planet, which is the bacteria. Various types of bacteria. I mean, they're ridiculously successful, and they have no intelligence at all. I mean, I don't think intelligence has got really anything to do with how destructive. I mean,
it can actually be, because when things we don't. This is getting a little. This will get a little political, and then I'll jump off of it. But as far as as far as like everybody destroying the planet kind of thing, one of the things that's become pretty evident over the past few years is people don't generally destroy their own property. So we have a lot of property in the world that is unowned, and it can actually, when it's unknown, it can be quite rational for an individual to want to get as much out of that and not replenish the resources than it is for people who own those resources to replenish them and keep up their value. So it is a sad thing, and maybe we should all be smarter and talk each other into doing things. But with incentives as they are often, it can be individually rational to get what's yours, and it can be not terribly rational, at least in the context of your life, to replenish those resources. Now, maybe you should care about future generations and all that, but it's not entirely irrational. It's the incentives that often count. I don't think it makes us a less.
Well, it also has to do with that we are incapable of thinking about long-term effects. We can't think about what will the Earth be like in 6,000 years after we have polluted it. People don't think
right,
like.
But if we own it and we pass it along to people, if we care about it and we pass it along and they have ownership of it, and I don't want to get too far into this, but that can change things too. So people respond to incentives, and you're right. But just because they don't think of the totality of humanity doesn't mean they're really stupid.
No, that's my point. Yeah. It's a side effect of being intelligent as we are. It's an old brain in a new world. That's how I like to put it. We still have a very primitive brain. We still have irrational fears, and that's why we are able to fuck things up still.
Yeah, fortunately though, we have the means with which to reverse things, and it doesn't have to be. We don't have to be doomed to be irrational forever, but we do have the ability to overcome those things. But I think probably people here agree that we're still, even though we have a lot of Google Plus and we have Macintosh computers and IBM computers and all these really elaborate things, and we're talking about cloning and all these things, we're still really primitive. I think most people in the U.S. are still religious. A lot of people. Was it 60% believe in angels?
Yeah, I was talking to a friend this morning, and we were discussing, basically what's the point, and the base bottom line of the entire genetic reason why we're even here is to reproduce. So basically, everything we're talking about right now is all about sex, ultimately, because we want to reproduce, which is why long-term thinking isn't a factor. We don't care about 15 generations from now because we want our genes to keep going.
Exactly.
So it's really tough to push that into a society when genetically we have no reason to think 20 generations down the road.
But you're always going to have a percentage of people who are just, not interested. People who are going to be sort of either, what's the point of it all, or they're not going to, it doesn't matter what type of incentive you give some people just... Yeah.
But
that's the problem when you try and do like a full communism type system,
And fertility tends to rise and fall according to economic well-being too. I think in the West, the fertility is generally down, and the desire to procreate.
I don't think it's fertility is down. It's women. I don't want to generalize, but society
procreation. I should
to the point that there's more to it than it's. Society is in such a state that everybody has to work, and so childbearing is pushed off. Kids used to have babies in their early mid-teens. Now they're having them in their 30s. So you're having less pregnancies, and you're having more children born with issues than if you were to do it when, there's reasons girls start having their periods in their teens, not their 20s. So we are trying to alter the genetics.
Right.
And paying the price for it. Yeah.
No, I agree. And thanks for correcting me. I meant what did I mean? Procreation, not really fertility, in that sense. But certainly there are offsetting economic reasons and so forth why people forego procreating. But that also may indicate that procreating is not the priority, the number one priority, or maybe we would.
Well, if we don't procreate, we're going to die. So it is the number one priority.
I think one of the major problems at the moment, especially in Western cultures, I can sort of see it, well, I seem to see it from outsider's perspective in the US and a bit here in Australia as well, in terms of, people grow up and then we educate people enough to understand that they need to, earn some money to obtain a living, and so and we tell them through consumerism and through all these sort of social standards and stuff, you need to get this, and you need to get that, and you need to get this, and so people aren't interested in sitting down and learning about themselves and becoming mature and doing the responsible things and what can we possibly do to help the planet and some of these things, because everyone's being pushed and driven. Particularly young ages. Get your car, get your clothes, get you this, get you that. Why do I want to, worry about moral responsibilities? That's not going to get me what I want. That seems to be this current thing going on at the moment, which doesn't seem to be helping.
So how do we get this back to self-awareness and consciousness?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Well, we have to start with being self-aware that we aren't talking about those things anymore.
Helena, what have you got to? What was your point? Just say it anyway. We'll meander back to that conversation.
Oh. Well, so I do like that you guys are making a distinction between consciousness and self-awareness. Seems to me self-awareness is one more distance backwards from what we could call consciousness.
I agree.
You have to pull yourself back one step to get from consciousness to self-awareness. But how does self-awareness develop? Like in the individual, not evolutionarily.
Right.
So I'm sort of imagining, just as we're talking, right? So this is like totally fresh. Never talked about it before. But so the brain as you go from less complicated to more complicated brains, you get more and more folding and more connections, and the connections are less linear and more web-like. Yes. And so to me that you can kind of analogize that to a kind of thinking where what you're able to relate becomes very, very arbitrary and can go in multiple directions, sort of like the way the folds in the brain, the extra folds in the brain allow, for the signals in the brain. So if you think about a baby, you start off relating to your environment. So your brain is relating to your environment. So you have one relationship going. And then you're also relating to other brains. So you have that relationship developing. So you've got the self-to-object relationship that you're learning about as a baby, and the self-to-other relationship that you're learning about as a baby. There's also then what happens perhaps is that you begin relating to the relating. So you make a triangle there. You've got self-to-object, self-to-other, and now you have object to other. You start watching others relating to objects. Then you notice others are relating to others. And that sort of kicks in the idea that others are bodies with minds.
Yes.
And it's that realization that allows you to begin to relate to the relations that you're seeing. So if you make a triangle, right, you start looking at the lines between the points on the triangle. And that's how I think you begin to develop self-awareness. It's through noticing the relating that other brains are doing in the world and relating to that relating.
Yes.
Yeah.
And consciousness and self-awareness for a baby starts the first time he sticks his hand in his mouth.
Can I just ask?
And that happens in the womb.
Can I just ask one thing though, because are there sort of two definitions of consciousness? Because when you say that someone is unconscious, as in they've been hit on the head and are no longer.
That's different.
Yeah. So that's a different definition. I mean, that's what I'm asking, because clearly, you could distinguish an unconscious baby from a conscious baby, even if the baby isn't self-aware. Which
I think that definition is just for the medical. It's just to help with.
I just wanted to sort of put that out there. So
I agree. Yeah, I agree. You're saying most people, when they say consciousness, they're talking about, they're including self-awareness, but I don't like doing that.
No, I don't either.
I like the more strict medical definition because, well, for one thing, there are lots of animals that have this more strict definition of consciousness, right? And then we can debate whether or not they have self-awareness too. But if you say consciousness includes self-awareness, well, then you have to say that people with Alzheimer's aren't conscious, or don't have consciousness, or neither do dogs, and that kind of thing. And it seems to me. Yeah, go ahead.
I would be careful not to sort of isolate humans as being specifically a lot different.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more.
I know that Yeah, because I mean, all these sort of sticky examples in the animal kingdom, especially the one that sort of gets me thinking is the elephants when they're supposed to have like ceremonial rituals of like the dead, like they have funerals and stuff like that or something. I think it's funerals. Anyway,
Some
they
animals
commemorate the
do.
dead in some way. They commemorate the dead in some way. So in other words, they're remembering, another entity that existed. So it's clear that they are aware that other elephants exist, and they sort of know who they are as an individual other elephant. They don't just respond to, they know that's their father or their, well, maybe not in that way in a relationship sense, but they know that that's that individual elephant.
I'm gonna find a video for you. Basically, there was a. Oh, here it is. I think this is it here. There was a guy who spent his entire life working with these elephants, and basically when he died, all the elephants that he was looking after went to where he was. Now, how would they know how to do that? And why would they know how to do that? They were aware of who this guy was, and they had empathy for the fact that he had died. So, are we the only aware animal on the planet? No way. Anyway, I'm going to try and find that video and I'll post it for you guys.
I mean, just from looking through the records of very intelligent non-humans, I think, as far as I can tell, this is just from my observation, so I might be completely wrong here, but I think the most intelligent non-human individual is something called Coco the gorilla. I don't know whether you've heard of her, but
of course, are you kidding? She proved generative language. Well, a couple of other animals have too, but to me, her forming new words because she didn't have words. For example, wear my neck ring because she didn't know the word for collar. Stuff like that is that stuff is powerful to me. Now I've heard people sort of explain it away, but even if it's just a rudimentary beginning of somebody of another kind of brain forming generative language, and even if doing so only after having been explicitly taught, nonetheless, to me, that really shows that it's just a matter of degree in terms of how much brain you have, and it's not some special cutoff. It's not like we're on a cliff and animals can't get up to the cliff. All right, so this is related to the soul to me, because to me it's just a gradient. And I know there was a thing in cognitive science where people were trying to say that maybe there's some gizmo, right, a module in the brain that makes humans distinct. And that
would be nice.
what always baffles me is why are scientists also hoping that there's a gizmo? I don't see why more scientists don't embrace what seems to me more and more. The evidence to me seems to be mounting more and more that it's simply a matter of degree. It's nothing special.
I agree.
But I could see how that would be a real problem for people who think humans have souls.
Yes, a huge problem.
But people who don't think humans have souls also fight this, and I don't know. It doesn't convince me completely that yes, there's something really cool about the human brain, but what it is that is cool is degree, as far as I'm concerned.
But I mean, of course, the variance in cognitive ability, and even in humans, I mean, never mind other species. I mean, the variance in just humans alone is absolutely huge. The individual variance.
Oh, without a doubt, yes.
I mean, in terms of Coco the gorilla, I don't know how valid this was, but it's alleged that Coco the gorilla has an IQ of about 85, which on the human scale is normal. It's slightly below the human average, but it's still normal. So, I mean, would you say that Coco is a genius among gorillas?
I don't know. It's interesting because Alex the parrot. Do you know about Alex the parrot?
Is this a bonobo?
No, it's a parrot.
We have bonobos.
A parrot. A bird. A parrot.
Okay, I haven't heard of that one now.
Well, the question is, so they worked real hard doing sort of applied behavior analysis principles, working with Alex the parrot to see how much sort of arbitrary relating they could get out of the parrot, and they got a lot. And the parrot started creating generative language as well. And Alex was just a parrot that they got randomly. However, when they tried, it's a little bit sketchy because Alex was doing some incredibly amazing things as far as what we could possibly ever think was even possible to come from a bird. But the thing is, that they tried to teach another one. And even Alex was doing like model rival type stuff, like Alex was trying to sneak the answer to the other parrot. But the other parrot didn't catch on. So maybe it really could be that they lucked out and Alex happened to be a really smart parrot. So that's interesting. Maybe could that have happened with Coco? I don't think so. I think it's because there was a lot of extra work teaching. And so that to me shows that other brains, if they can be taught, then there's some kind of capability in that brain that is more similar to our own brain than dissimilar. Maybe not than dissimilar, but certainly you can't say it doesn't exist.
Can I
The bad aspects exist as well. I mean, in chimpanzees are a particularly good example because chimpanzees inherit all the bad things about humans. There's been cases where chimpanzees have chased smaller monkeys that just for the pleasure of chasing them. So they chase them, kill them, and torture them to death just because they enjoy doing it. They don't even eat them.
Actually, that reminds me about something that it's a psychological experiment they did on some of the great apes, on some of the great apes in order to differentiate them. And what they did was they gave a camera to a chimpanzee and see what it would do with it, and it would most likely just destroy it because that's what it thought was fun. And then they gave it to a gorilla, and the gorilla disassembled it. And it just let it there, and then they gave it to the orangutan, and it disassembled it, and then it tried to put it back together. I just thought that was very fascinating.
So, can I jump in here?
Sure.
I put a link up there. There are a couple of things I want to talk about here. I read a book called The Apes of Fauna Fauna whatever, I can't remember, but that's the link of the web of the actual, there's a sanctuary just outside of Montreal where this couple went and rescued these various types of apes from chemical labs, biochemical labs, cosmetic labs, brought them to this place just outside of Montreal and took care of them. And what they, the book, I cried as I was reading this book as to how human these animals really are, and how little we really understand them. And as for the, you're talking about the chimps being aggressive. Well, the chimps are our nearest cousins on one side, and the bonobos are our nearest cousins on the other side. And if you were wanting to know what bonobos are like, they're like hippies. They're like free love, open sex, whatever. That's our makeup, and that's who we are. Those are our two cousins. They're the closest genetically to us. That if you want a book about that one, you can read Sex at Dawn by Christopher Ryan, and he lays out this history of where we come from genetically, and it's exactly what you guys are talking about. We pick up characteristics from our cousins. And we go, well, that's just weird, but that's us. That is how we are. We have this conscious ability and a self-awareness that they might not have. That gives us the ability to comprehend and cognitize all these different things, and we have philosophy and all these other things to help us theoretically be better at what we are. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but that doesn't make us better, it just makes us different. So anyway. Right, Oz?
I'm afraid I've come to the discussion late, so I don't exactly know what's being discussed.
We're talking, basically, we started the conversation talking about the origins of consciousness. And basically we're at a point where we very directly made a distinction between self-awareness and consciousness. And we've got consciousness being defined as, I've defined it as the sum functioning of all the stimuli that our brain receives, and how we relate and interact with our environment. And I haven't defined it as anything more than that.
Okay. Well, I know that in the philosophical literature and in the cognitive sciences, the word consciousness is very, very vague. It's varied in how it's understood. But there are like different features of our mental life that can be picked out and that are somewhat more precisely defined. Consciousness is sometimes just means awareness. Sometimes it means self-awareness. So some might mean self-consciousness, but there are certain features of our mental life that we can pick out. Like one of the big ones is intentionality. It's a funny word. It has nothing to do specifically with the idea of intending to do anything. It's just a term of art that was coined by a philosopher named Franz Brentano. And intentionality is just the mind's capacity to refer beyond itself. Sitting here in Ontario, Canada, I can think about what's going on in Brazil. I can think about a glass of beer that's sitting in front of me. And that's kind of a remarkable fact, that the oatmeal textured stuff between my ears can be about anything. So intentionality just refers to the mind's capacity to refer, to think about. It's sometimes described as the capacity for aboutness, the fact that I can have a thought that is about something. Now, that might be a separate capacity from consciousness, but obviously it's tied to consciousness, because when we think of consciousness, we imagine that whatever mind we're talking about is aware, and to be aware of something is to be aware of something. So clearly it would seem to be that intentionality plays into this. So a lot of people in the cognitive sciences, in AI, in the field of mind, philosophy of language, they're very much concerned with this feature called intentionality, which is just the mind's capacity to think about things, to refer beyond itself. And it can also refer to itself. You can think not just about the cup that's sitting in front of you, you can also think about the thought of the cup. And you can even think about the fact that you're thinking about the cup, and on and on. It's recursive this way. But the idea is that typically our thoughts have an object of thought, but not all of our mental states are characterized by this capacity called intentionality. For instance, when I look at something, there is what's called an intentional object. There's the object of my perception. So most of our perceptions of the world, what we hear, what we see, what we touch, what we smell, what we taste, etc., there is an intentional object. There is an object that we see. There is a sound that we hear. There's a taste that we savor, and those are the objects. Those are what are called the intentional objects of our experiences. But some of our experiences don't seem to really have an intentional object. For instance, if you think about a pain, if you feel a pain in your elbow, it's not clear what the object of your pain is. There's something somewhat intentionalistic about the feeling of a pain in your elbow, in that it has, the pain exists in a place and at a time. So there's something somewhat intentionalistic about it, but there's no proposition that you can describe or that would capture the object of your conscious state. Or think of a state like just a general state of anxiety, when you're feeling anxious and you're not. Sometimes you're just feeling anxious and it's not directed at anything. There's no object of anxiety. There's nothing in particular that makes you anxiety. You're just perhaps anxious. Or or sometimes one can have a feeling of dread that's not particularly associated with anything around you that you're thinking about. There's no object of dread. There's just this feeling. So some of our mental life is characterized by intentionality, but not all of our mental states are intentionalistic in character. So
that's true. That's very true. A lot of how we exist is on a subconscious level.
Well, it's not subconscious. I mean, when you're feeling a pain, you're feeling dread, you're feeling anxiety, you're very much conscious of it, right? It's just that there isn't an object, right?
That's right.
So,
that's right.
there isn't an object of consciousness. There isn't it's not always the case that there's an object of consciousness. Typically, there is, and it's sort of interesting to wonder where in the history of brains, in the evolution of brains and minds, does the capacity not just to experience things, but to be self-consciously aware of these things, and where there's an object of consciousness, where does that come into the picture? You know, we can do it presumably. Dogs, when they look at things, clearly there's an object of their visual perceptions. They see things. You know, my dog sees his dog food. I'm sure that he doesn't know that it is dog food, but he sees the dog food. There's an intentional object there, and I'm sure a lobster, when it sees a lobster of the opposite sex, recognizes it as such and has some mental life. But you know, at what point is there no mental life? Does an earthworm have a mental life? Well, maybe it's capable of feeling pains. Maybe it's capable of some very low level appetitive states like hunger. But you can keep going until at some point there's just not enough neurophysiology there and not enough behavior going on there for you to ascribe any intentional content or any mental state at all. And it's possible that they just don't have any mental states at some point. So clearly in the evolution of life, at some point, the capacity to have mental states arose, but we don't know where that is. But you know, time will tell.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of these things are a continuum. So we really, it's pretty automatic that we sense different things. Where the volition comes in, what do we do with that sensory data, including what conclusions do we form based on it? If it's something that biochemically affects our appetite, do we eat that piece of pie? Do we not? Or what? First, obviously, that's way downstream. First of all, what is it? Well, it's a piece of pie, and we pretty much get that conclusion from our experiences. So that it seems automatically when we see a pie, we just boom, that's a pie. But there's actually a process by which we recollect our memories. And as far as anxiety goes, a lot of times that is in the subconscious. Can be things that experiences that we've had in the past that we have repressed or we haven't thought about why they are the source of that anxiety. There's these are kinds of questions of epistemology too, like what does it mean to be, or studies of the mind. What's the chain of events? Some say we sort of start at the sensory level with just colors and shapes and stuff like that, and then at the perceptual level, we're kind of putting them into objects and maybe primary concepts. And then as you get up higher in the conceptual ladder, which does involve a degree of choice if you want to do this, the bottom level, pretty autonomic, same thing that animals do. They can look at something after a while and know what it is sort of instantly. But when you get up into the conceptual level, that's where higher life forms differentiate. That's where volition becomes really important, and choice, and how we try to be objective or not, and stuff like that. So I get the intentionality. But just one other quick point. I notice when we try to define consciousness, we just use synonyms for it. So we say it's awareness. That's kind of the same thing as saying consciousness, pretty much, and that kind of is an indication. It's not proof, but that consciousness just might be a primary thing that we really can't get outside of to really get a handle on. So.
Well, it seems that isn't the consciousness and the brain really they're one and the same? Isn't consciousness simply an abstraction to be able to describe easily what is being thought of as opposed to the anatomical structure, but it really is just the same thing? That consciousness isn't a real thing, independent. It doesn't have its own. I'm not going to bump into a consciousness while I drive down the street. It's simply a way of talking about the brain.
Some say that the people who put forth the idea of mind-body duality would say that it's part of your soul and that it's transient and it is something separate. That would not be the view that I have come to accept. I don't know. I can't speak for everybody here. It sounds like most people here don't support mind-body duality. I know some secularists do, however. So I want to presume.
We should distinguish between two kinds of dualism. There's what's called substance dualism and property dualism. The dualism that we normally think of is, where you imagine the mind as somehow being a soul, or the dualism of René Descartes, sort of the most classic form of dualism, imagines that there are physical things, and physical things are characterized by the fact that they have extension in space.
Right.
Res extensa, the things that are extended. And then there is res cogitans, the things that are not extended, the things that are the mental things. And Descartes sort of chopped everything, all the features of reality, into two. He said, look, things either have extension, in which case they're physical things. He didn't have much of a concept of energy at the time in the sense that we have now. And there are mental things, and mental things he thought didn't have extension and were quite logically separable from physical things, and he thought they were ontologically separable. He thought that the mental had to be a separate substance, okay, so that there could in fact be a disembodied mind. That he thought that this was quite possible. God, for instance, is a disembodied mind. Your soul is you are your soul. He would have said.
Arguably, God is a disembodied mind. You mean?
Yeah, but I mean.
Wait, let's hear about property dualism, because I haven't ever. Yeah.
Okay.
Tell us about that.
Well, first I want to say something about substance dualism. Well, let me explain why there's any kind of dualism at all, because it goes to the idea of property dualism. And just to look ahead, property dualism is simply the view that although mind and body are can be, maybe one causes the other, presumably. The idea is that there are properties of the mind that are not assimilable to the physical. They're not reducible to the physical. There will never be causally reducible to the physical, to brain states. That's sort of one of the views of property dualism. And the idea is that mental phenomena have certain features that simply can't be explained. There's no way. There's nothing within our conceptual apparatus, our conceptual understanding of the physical that will ever help us explain certain mental features. So, what are those mental features? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Helena.
No, I'm just wondering why? Why do they think that?
Okay. Well, there are in fact certain features of the mental that are difficult, that are recalcitrant, that don't seem assimilable to our overall physicalistic ontology.
Okay.
And I say this as someone who is in fact a physicalist. I'm not I'm not a metaphysical naturalist in the sense that I'm absolutely committed to the idea that that the natural exhausts the all of reality. I'm sort of open on that question, but we have to admit, we have to be fair when we assess mental states. It is prejudicial to say the mind just is the brain.
Well, are you saying?
So what you're about to let's let Ozzy list the inexplicables.
Okay.
Well, give us a good list, and I've got my pen ready.
Okay. Well, there's one that, first of all, consciousness, just awareness, the fact that you can be aware of anything. Okay.
Okay.
Another is intentionality. How can the oatmeal textured stuff between my ears possibly be about anything? I mean,
right.
the beer glass in front of me isn't about anything. It doesn't refer. There's no aboutness going on there, right? No physical object, no matter how complex it's arranged, seems to be about anything. It's only our minds somehow that have this capacity, right?
But help me, Ozzy, right there. I'm sorry. I just want to. I know he's listening, but I got to ask. But how does excuse me? How does being unable to explain a phenomena justify ascribing a phenomena to something that we cannot validate or test?
No, that's not what they're doing. What they're doing is they're saying, look, there are. Okay, think how you pick out mental phenomena. How do you even pick out a phenomenon as a mental phenomenon? Have you ever picked out a mental phenomenon by pointing to its color, its mass, its extension or shape, or any physical thing? No, never.
So,
There's no mental phenomena. When you think of a thought, when you think of a perception, when you think of a decision, when you think of an idea, conceptualization, imagination, forming a proposition in your head, none of these do you ever need to advert or refer to any physical state in your brain or anywhere else. We are able to pick out mental states.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
How does this fit into the idea of emerging properties? So maybe it's not sufficient perhaps to say, but maybe we can say that thoughts, volition, all of these things are emergent properties from this conscious. Maybe we don't understand exactly how, but is that not is that not a satisfactory hypothesis?
Well, it's a blank check. The idea that the mind emerges out of physical states is certainly a possibility, but it's not an answer because there's no explanation there. It's sort of a placeholder for an explanation.
But
right?
but there are such things as emergent properties that things.
Sure.
Things
Yeah,
have
absolutely.
different properties than their parts. We were sort of getting into that a little bit earlier.
Sure. I mean, let me give you
division
an
and composition arguments and errors and stuff.
I can give an example of an emergent property in the physical world that makes perfect sense that we have no difficulty with. Okay, if I say that if I say that water is H2O, okay, what I'm saying is that water, whether it's in a gaseous state or a liquid state or a solid state, whatever its physical state, is composed of an atom of oxygen and 2 atoms of hydrogen. Okay, and specifically a water molecule by itself actually isn't in a state. It's not in a gaseous state. It's not in a liquid state.
Can't drink it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the interaction of H2O molecules together. How they're colliding. Okay.
But it seems to be possible that obviously we don't know the answer, but that the
we know the answer.
Biochemical things that are going on create this emergent property known as.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves here.
Okay.
Actually, one thing you I suppose with your water, for example, you could look at the thermal properties of the environment. You could look at how warm it is. You could look at the pressure that the single atom, that the single molecule of water is under, and then based on that, you could extrapolate what phase it would be in. Because I mean, phase is also based on other molecules that are in other than pure water. So if you add things like salt as well, that changes the phase. So I mean,
that's my point. In the case of all of these physical reductions, where we've reduced the properties of water, what we call the surface properties of water, like its liquidity when it's in a liquid state, the fact that I can drink water, that I can bathe it, that I can swim in it, that I can pour it, okay, is different than when it's solid. Solidity, liquidity, gaseousness, these are real features, okay, but they are the surface features of water molecules, and those surface features of water molecules are determined by a number of factors that we understand, namely how they're colliding with each other, and how they're colliding with each other is itself determined by a host of other physical circumstances that are going on, having to do with temperature and stuff like that. Or when we talk about heat, we say, oh, it's hot in here. Well, the room is warm. What we mean is what we're describing there is the mean or average kinetic energy of the air molecules, okay, of the molecules composing the air. Yeah.
Those are we can know heat and cold in the air because of physical responses in our skin.
Yeah, it has no. I'm not talking about the mind at all here. I'm talking about purely physical objects.
I'm trying to follow you here. I'm just making sure that I'm not losing track of
I'm trying to give examples, what would be called paradigm cases of physicalistic reductions, where the property at the high level, the warmth of the room, the liquidity of the water, the solidity of the table, the transparency of the glass, okay, all of these features are understood at a lower level in our ontology, a lower level of description in terms of little teensy particles smashing into each other. Okay, we don't have direct experience of the teensy particles bashing into each other, but we understand that they're there. We have reasons for thinking they're there, and we're able to explain the surface features that we do experience in terms of lower level phenomena that are delivered to us through scientific investigation. Okay, now there's nothing mysterious there. In other words, the liquidity of the water is a real feature of the water, right? If it wasn't, I couldn't drink a glass of water. I couldn't bathe in it. I couldn't pour it, right? But even though the liquidity, that real feature of the water at that surface level is real, it's actually there, and is caused by and realized by the physical matter, the particles bashing into each other, I can't reach into a glass of water, pull out a molecule of a single molecule of H2O and say, oh, I wonder if this one's wet. Let me see if I can find a dry one. You know, you can't do that, right? Because liquidity and solidity and gaseousness and transparency, these are properties that only exist at a higher level of description. So the idea is with physical systems, any physical system can admit of higher and lower levels of description, and these are not incompatible levels of description. I can describe my car in terms of carburetors and gasoline and explosions in the engine, but I can also describe what's going on there at a much lower level of description in terms of the rapid oxidization of hydrocarbon molecules. Okay, these are not incompatible descriptions. They are two different descriptions of the same phenomenon, but at two different levels of description, two different levels of analysis. But so what we have here is an intertheoretical reduction. We have sort of a surface level features of things like liquidity and the temperature of the room, the transparency of the glass, the explosion of my car engine when I turn my engine over, and then there are lower level descriptions of all of this that explain the higher level features. In other words, the higher level features are perfectly understood in terms of the brute, mindless interactions of the matter. Okay. And now that's what we'd like to do with the mind. What we'd like to do with the mind is, ideally, what we want to say is, look, when I think of something, when I have an experience, when I make a decision, when I deliberate about something, when I feel an emotion, when I think a sentence, surely that's all happening, and there's something corresponding going on in the brain. But the problem is we don't have the bridge principles. We don't know how to connect a brain state with a mental state, except to say these two states co-occur. We don't know why. Why do these neuron firings result in fear? Why do these neuron firings result in the feeling of pain? Why do these neuron firings result in the experience of a memory? Why do these neuron firings, and so on?
Ozzy, can I just
I forget about the.
I don't have answers to that. No, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, we have observed that this physical state of the brain and its environment can have effects on behavior. So, although we don't understand these really, perhaps can affect fear and so forth. So I don't know that it's a huge leap to say that something physical is going on there as well as.
No, that's not the objection. Okay, this is not that's not what I'm saying. No one is challenging that there isn't this connection between the brain and the mind. I mean, even a substance dualist thinks that your brain is necessary. Even a substance dualist like Descartes knows that if I blow your brains out, you stop thinking. Okay.
Right. Okay.
That's not the objection. The objection is, how do you explain? How do you affect this reduction? In the case of the atomic theory of matter, we understand why the interaction. We know why water pours. Okay. We understand why water is wet at certain temperatures and why it pours. We understand that in terms of the behavior. Okay, it's not just a matter of, well, what happened was we observed the molecules bashing into each other, and we observed that whenever they're bashing into each other this in a certain way, they're liquid. No. There's actually bridge principles.
Experiments can be repeated, and that's not the only challenge. But you can repeat. Water interacting with the environment in a much better way than you can the brain when there's volition involved.
It's better than that. It's that you can predict. If you understand atomic theory, there's hardly any surface features that we know. There's hardly any surface features that are mysterious to us where we go, oh, I wonder why this surface feature exists. But once you understand atomic theory, we understand why the table is solid.
But as a question here, Oz. But as a question here, I mean, the example that we're talking about with water and emergence property of it saying being wet, where would you fit, for example, a slightly different analogy, but from the same realm, and that is that we understand that particular radioactive elements will decay over time, and we can predict the rate of decay over time, but it seems that we are a total loss in terms of being able to understand which atoms are going to decay at any particular time, and there doesn't seem to be any mechanistic formula that we've been able to derive to determine that. And to some extent, I hate to use the word, but it's sort of magical. So we statistically know the rate, and we know what will happen to it, but we cannot predict how those emergent properties of radioactive decay occur, or what's causing it on a case-by-case basis. Is that something that would be similar to the way that we view the brain? And do we then take the same approach in the sense of sort of a property dualism with that?
Well, hang on. I haven't even gotten to property dualism yet.
All right. Okay.
I mean, with respect to the mind, I haven't gotten to property dualism with respect to the mind. But the point is, there's a dualism in our ordinary workaday physics, okay, in terms of the surface properties, and then the lower level explanation at the micro level. Okay, the micro level causally explains. In other words, all of the surface features are causally determined by the lower level features. There's no gap there. There's no mystery. Right? There's no, oh, geez, how do we explain the solidity? We understand the solidity, we understand the liquidity, we understand the transparency. These features are perfectly well understood. Same thing with your car engine. Okay. The problem is, though, with mind, there are certain features of the mind. So getting back to Helena's list here that she was begging for. Okay. Yeah. Something like consciousness. Okay. We don't know how any arrangement of matter, not even an arrangement of matter we could imagine, never mind the one that's actually found in the brain. There's no arrangement of matter yet that allows us to predict, by looking at that arrangement of matter, oh, of course, look at this arrangement, of course it's going to be conscious. No, that's not the case. We are astonished to discover that any arrangement of matter results in consciousness. Same thing with intentionality. There is no feature of the brain or its arrangement that explains at this stage why consciousness emerges. Same thing with things like rationality or free will, or just deliberation. If you don't believe in sort of metaphysical free will, just think of our capacity for deliberation. Subjectivity. Here's a really big problem. Okay, it is characteristic of our mental states that they have what we call a first-person epistemology, or first-person subjective ontology. That is, I'm aware of my pain in a way that you're not aware of my pain. And you're aware of your pains in a way that I'm not aware of them. I can infer from your behavior that you're in pain, but you don't infer that you're in pain from your behavior. And I don't infer that I'm in pain from my behavior. I just know that I'm in pain. I can infer that you're in love. When I'm in love, I don't have to do any inferring. I just feel it, okay? And that's characteristic of our mental states. I can ascribe mental states to you. I can say, John believes that Mary thinks that Sally wants such and such. You can do that. I mean, it's very, very complicated, but we actually do that on a daily basis. We ascribe intentional content to people every single day. It's how you negotiate in the world. Oh, I think that guy said this because he wants a better price on this, and so he was negotiating by thinking this and trying to lie to the person to get them to believe that. We do that constantly, effortlessly. We ascribe intentional content to people all the time.
We even do it to fictional characters too, and cartoons and stuff like that.
We do it to inanimate objects. Falsely when we do it to inanimate objects, of course, because they don't have mental states. But the point is, we do this all the time. But when you are ascribing for another person a mental state, that is ascribing to another person a mental state, what you're doing there is it's an inference. Okay, it's an inference. You are basing it. It's a kind of prediction. Okay, you're applying a kind of theory of mind. Okay, it's really on analogy with how your own mind works, presumably. But the point is, you never have to do that for yourself. You never have to go when you're thinking a thought. I wonder what thought I'm thinking when you're thinking a thought, right? Like, and it's amazing how this works. I mean, I don't even know how the sentence that I'm uttering right now is going to end, but it's going to end somehow. But this is all presumably all going on in the hardware, but we don't understand how. Okay. But our thoughts have a first-person subjective ontology. I just experience my thoughts. I just experience my memories. I just experience my emotions. I just experience my decisions and my will, and the intentions and action when I carry out a bodily action, for instance. Okay, so there are all these weird features: subjectivity, rationality, intentionality, consciousness, mental causation is another one. You know, I mean. Let me give you another one. I mean, mental causation is when you decide to do something. I decide to raise my arm, and it goes up. We don't know how that works yet. I mean, obviously the brain is relevant. The brain, and we know quite a lot. I mean, supposing someone said, oh look, Ozzy, we can explain how the brain causes bodily actions. You can say there are secretions of acetylcholine at the axon end plates of the motor neurons coming out of the motor cortex, and these activate the cytoplasm of the muscle fiber through the action of calcium ions on the muscle fiber, and you get enough action potentials together. This produces a ratcheting effect of the myofilaments, which is just a lower level description of the muscle contraction in your shoulder, which causes your arm to go up. There, I just did it, right? Now, the problem is there's a step left out. Before all that happened, I formed a decision to raise my arm. And even if you think that decision is ultimately anchored in the physical, which I think it is, we don't know why a mental state, such as a decision or a memory or a thought or an emotion, ever arises out of a physical state at all. Why should there be a way that it feels like to be something? Why this is a mystery to us. So these features are still mysterious to us. There really is a mind-body problem here. We don't know, by looking at the physical stuff, right, at any level you like, we still don't understand why the gunk in your head, no matter how it's organized and what it's doing, results in the mental features that it does. All we can do right now is very carefully correlate mental events with the physical events in the brain, and hopefully this will at some point allow us to build a model where we will have bridge principles that allow us to say, aha, according to the theory, if you have this set of neural events, it has to result in an experience of the color blue, or the memory of a picnic you went on in southern Ontario, or whatever. But right now we have nothing like that. There's like literally no mental phenomenon that we can explain in terms of the physical yet.
I saw a great article today. This is a side note, but it kind of connects to this. Somebody sent me the link. They'd done some experiments with I think it was a tadpole, if I remember right. And what they had done is they had blinded a tadpole, took out its eyes, but and I may get a little bit of this fuzzy here, but they took some of the genetic material or some of the information that generates eyes, and had transplanted it into the tail of the salamander, where it grew an ectopic eye, which had no direct links to the brain of the salamander, but it was connected to its. I'm not sure spinal cord is the right word, but you get the gist of it. And then they initiated some tests, since the salamander is blind, with being able to have different areas of red and blue in the water, where they could apply a very small shock if the animal went in the wrong place. And discovered that the animal's brain, the salamander's brain, was actually able to reconfigure itself and see via this ectopic eye, even though it didn't have a direct link to what would be the equivalent of the visual cortex, which again is very spooky, but I think very interesting too, along the same lines.
Can I mention something I said before? Sorry, Ozzy. I just wanted to bring up something that I was mentioning before, and that was that obviously it was a benefit for us to be able to remember events, and somewhere, you can imagine along the evolutionary way of our brain, the shape of our brain, that was a pressure, that was a benefit, and that stuck with us. And also the ability to predict future events, sort of thing. Put those in our mind, construct future events, and see how they might unfold. And I just think that if you apply both those principles, you arise at being able to be aware of yourself from that. Is that well? I must be doing huge jumps here or something, but
no, that's a good point. I mean, there's no one is sort of struggling with why we have a mental life. I mean, obviously, any organism that can behave, like a plant, doesn't do much, right? It doesn't try to escape its predators. It doesn't try to go after predators. I mean, even a Venus flytrap doesn't do much, except there's a kind of triggering response when something hits certain fibers. It closes up on a fly or something, but that's about it, right? Or a sunflower phototropically turns to track the sun, right? And we understand that process is very well understood. But the point is, there's not a lot of behavioral plasticity in something like a plant, okay? But anything that can move, that can be preyed upon, and it has a body that can allow it to move, needs a system in its body that can represent changing circumstances in its environment so that it can behave appropriately. There's no point in chewing unless there's food in your mouth. There's no point in fornicating unless there's a partner that you're with. And there's no point in fleeing enemies that aren't there. So you have to be able to track reality. And that's what a brain is for. That's what a brain does. But the question that arises is, look, if all it does is, all it's necessary to do is produce the behavior, why does there have to be a way that it feels like? Why does there have to be a way that something looks like or sounds like? Why can't something just not have experiences but just behave like a zombie appropriately, but without any subjective mental states, without any consciousness, without any awareness, without any intentionality, right? It just has to behave mechanistically like you might build a robot.
I would just suggest, sorry, that it possibly might just be us seeing what's occurring.
Well, I think it's,
our body. We become hungry, and we think we decide to go and go to the fridge.
Couldn't you make an argument? Couldn't you make an argument that it's very much like a flight simulator? So if I tell you, Oz, that I'm sitting here and I just had a bowl of butter pecan ice cream and liverwurst all blended together, you're probably mentally having a somewhat disgusting reaction in sort of envisioning what that might taste like. But the idea is that you can sort of project that this is a foul tasting object without actually having ever tasted the object or anything close to it. It seems like there could be an evolutionary explanation in that there's value in being able to project out a situation or experience internally a situation that hasn't yet actually happened.
That's what I was saying, that a system has to be able to track reality around it, and one of the advantages is to also be able to model the way that reality isn't but could be, and then you can entertain possibilities. But the point is, why does that feel like anything? Why do you have to be aware of that? Why do you have to be conscious of it? Right? My chess-playing computer, right, models understands the position of the pieces on the board. It can evaluate various moves, right? Various potential courses of action, right? But there's nothing that it feels like to my chess-playing computer, presumably, right? It isn't thinking, uh-oh, my queen's in danger, I better, No, there's nothing like that going on in its head. It's not thinking, oh, maybe I should sacrifice a pawn, Oh, no, that's a bad idea.
No, but wouldn't it make
that's
sense?
Going to jeopardize my knight. It doesn't think anything. It doesn't have to.
But when you talk about why does it feel something, I mean, couldn't that be very much because you were talking earlier about that we infer states of mind in other beings that we communicate with or connect with, and certainly it seems like that in and of itself certainly has a value, a survival value. So I can infer that the guy with the club in his hand and the angry expression on his face probably means I should turn tail and run. But is it? It seems to me that it would be a reasonable statement, maybe, to say that I can explain that in evolutionary terms, that there's a need for that and why that would have come about, and that it seems that system then maybe when we perceive our own feelings and emotions, that's simply a byproduct of the ability to infer what we see in others.
But calling something a byproduct doesn't provide the bridge principle. I know. Here's the difficulty. Okay. Nobody is struggling with why do we have memories? Why do we have perception? Why do we deliberate? Why do we have a capacity to think? We understand the function, the value in all of these things, right? Those all make perfect sense. Okay. Explaining it in terms of the uses that it serves doesn't explain why. When your C fibers are firing, it hurts.
Right.
But I don't. The question is, see, here's a way to explain it. Okay. Supposing that we opened up somebody's brain, okay, and we discovered that although they behaved perfectly normally, the neural architecture was completely different. Okay. We would go, wow, we got somebody here with a completely different neural architecture. Okay, and yet they behave exactly like us. Oh, that would be really weird. Now we're really gonna have to figure out. Geez, now it's not even just that these brain states, in normals result in these mental states. Now we've got a completely different kind of brain state that results in the same darn mental state. Holy cow! How are we ever going to do this? Well, we're kind of in that position right now. We don't actually know why any brain state gives rise to the mental state that it does. That's the difficult. This is the mind-body problem. There is no way to connect those right now. We don't have the bridge principles between them. No one doubts. I mean, nobody in the cognitive sciences or philosophy of mind seriously doubts that brains cause minds. The question is, how does this causation work? That is still quite occult to us. We don't understand. Positing a different realm, a different ontological realm, doesn't make it better. It makes it worse, because then you have the problem of how could something that is purely mental and non-physical ever interact with the physical? So the substance dualisms, the people who believe in disembodied souls, they have the worst problem. They've got more problems than the rest of us, because, I mean, when I look at something, if the mind just is somehow causally reducible to the brain, and I look at something, well, light enters my eyes, it goes into my visual cortex through my optic nerve and stuff like that. It's not quite so bizarre that I should have a mental experience if the brain causes the visual experience, okay? But how exactly does that work if the mind is completely disembodied? Do the neurons, are the neurons tickling some part of the soul, right? And if the soul is disembodied and I decide to raise my arm, how does the disembodied thought that is in no way physical, has no extension, no mass, how does it interact and cause neuron firings? It can't.
Yeah, I know. I say so. When you get back to particle, so get back to that again. So particle dualism, though. I mean, so that.
Hang on, Karlton. Okay. Sorry, James had a question.
Did you say that again? The last part.
Yeah. So we have all these problems that the property dualists point to that I named earlier: subjectivity, rationality, free will, consciousness, and intentionality. All of these things are very difficult. Mental causation. These are all very difficult to reduce to the physical. But if you believe in substance dualism, you've got an extra problem. You have an interaction problem. How does something non-physical cause a physical event, and how could a physical event in the brain result in a corresponding state change of state in the soul, right? I mean, and one way that this was solved by theologians, they posited something called preordained or pre-established harmony. God, when He created your brain and He created your soul, He created them such that although they would never causally interact with one another, He ordained it such that whenever your eyeballs were looking at something, there would be a corresponding visual experience in your soul. but one wasn't causing the other.
That's convenient. That's nice.
Yeah, it's called pre-established or preordained harmony between these two things, these two ontological realms that cannot causally interact. It's God that sees to it that they work in parallel all the time. So when your soul decides to raise your arm, your robotic body caused by God goes up and down, but your soul doesn't actually interact with your body. So that was one way to get around the problem, the Cartesian problem of Cartesian substance dualism. But the point is, even if you get rid of that problem of substance dualism, you're still left with these properties which we don't yet know how to reduce. Now, some people think the problem is insoluble because they think there just isn't anything yet in our theory of the physical that would ever explain how consciousness and any of these other features of our mental lives could arise. And there are other people who just say, well, yeah, it's true, we haven't got a clue yet. It's kind of like when we didn't understand why a phase state, a physical phase state, happened, why water melted at a certain temperature, and why it was gaseous, and how sublimation happened, and why glass was transparent, and we just didn't understand any of these things. We didn't know what we could predict under what circumstances it would happen, but we had no idea of the other underlying physical ontology that caused it. Well, we're kind of at that, not kind of, we are at that stage right now. We have no clue how this works yet. We're hoping we'll get there someday, but
And I know we've argued about this before, but I don't quite understand why you wouldn't assume it's a purely physical and naturalistic phenomenon. I mean,
because there's I think it is physical and naturalistic. I'm optimistic that someday we will sort this out, because I think we're ingenious enough to sort it out. But it's prejudicial to insist that it has to be. It doesn't have to be.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, Oz. Let me go back to something. I'm I'm understanding a lot of what we're talking about today, which is quite phenomenal for me actually. But you said a couple of things that caught my attention, and I might be taking them out of the context of the entire argument you're making or the point you're making. So just let me ask you my question, and you can tell me if I'm missing on what it is you're trying to say.
Sure.
You talked about me lifting up my arm and not knowing the mechanism of how that works. That's absolutely wrong. I can tell you physically how everything works.
I did that myself.
Change.
I actually did that. I actually described the mechanism.
But then you're saying, but did you not say that we don't know how that works? We don't know how to explain that. Didn't you say that?
No, what I said is what we don't understand is why the neural events that are involved when I'm making the decision, or the events just prior to my conscious awareness of the decision. We don't know why any neural event results in an experience of a decision as opposed to an experience of a memory, as opposed to an experience of looking at blue, as opposed to the feeling of love. We don't know how to. All we can do is correlate right now a specific mental state with a specific physical state. We don't know why that physical state gives rise to that particular mental state.
So
that's
Could I possibly bring in something from earlier, because I think it has relevance here. I came up with a few thought experiments earlier about this, and anyway, I'll just go ahead. Do you think it's possible to download consciousness into a machine, and what implications would that have?
Are you asking me?
Anyone.
I think it's possible in principle, but we don't yet, because we don't understand the bridge principles. The problem is right now is we don't know what the relevant features are of our brains that we would have to simulate in a computer. See, like you could say, your brain is a computer. Well, sure. I mean, under a certain description, anything is a computer, right? My laptop is obviously a computer, but so is my coffee mug a computer. It's a computer that has a trivial program. It has a one-step program that says, stay there. Okay? Anything can be described as a digital computer, as a set of instructions, okay? As a set of procedural rules, right? So the idea is this. You could simulate my brain states in a computer. In fact, you could simulate it not at some Mickey Mouse level of neurons. You could simulate my brain in a computer at the level of individual molecules and atoms, okay, not some Mickey Mouse level. At the quantum level, if you wanted to, you could simulate that in a computer. But you wouldn't. But any simulation is going to model in some features and leave out others. And until you understand what the relevant causal features are of your brain that produce your mental life, you might screw up and not simulate the right thing. So yes, I would say in principle we could download ourselves into a computer, but not until we know what the relevant features are of our brains that need to be simulated. And then even then, it's not entirely clear that simulating that will do it, because there could be something about the actual physicality of the brain that's relevant, and it's not something that's merely symbolic.
Well, that's sort of what James was saying earlier when we had. I'm sorry if I'm strawmanning you, James, but and that's sort of what you were saying, that it's not symbolic and it's related to the brain. The extension to this is, if it does become possible to do this, would it be possible to completely transfer your consciousness to a computer? And would you be able to extend that even further and duplicate your consciousness so that you were conscious in two places at once?
Well, I think that let me try that a little bit. I think there's two pieces to this. I think you could probably replicate, or in theory, replicate the static state of a person's brain. In other words, I could probably replicate the chemicals. I could probably replicate, let's say we could replicate the physical connectivity, and maybe we could even replicate the electrical potential at any given point in time. And I don't know if it is static, if it's a static representation, if there would be a sort of a consciousness in suspended animation, if you will. So I think in addition to probably replicating the static state of the machine, we also have to understand I think what I was saying, we have to understand the relevance of the communication within that machine. So in other words, just like my CPU and my computer, I can certainly build a new CPU. I can go to Intel and there it is. It's sitting there on the assembly line, done. But its ability to perform some sort of work is dependent on the electrical impulses that are flowing, and if those impulses aren't flowing in a specified way, it is not going to produce either any useful work or certainly not the work that I think it's going to produce. And I don't know how you would, and I don't know, for me at least, I don't know how we would ever get to that point.
Oh, I think that could be simulated. I mean, just imagine that we had a really exhaustive description of the neural events in your brain, so that we knew every neural firing, all the action potentials,
Sure.
all the inhibitory inhibitions that are happening and
well, yeah, then it's just a big circuit board then.
Right, but now it's supposing that you were just model this in your computer second by second as your brain states were changing. Okay, so
Right.
now you don't just have a single static picture of a brain like a
Yeah.
time slice, right?
Right.
You have the whole thing. Now you could simulate that. You could run that and just say, okay, well, let's see. Now, the idea is this: if the sort of the strong AI thesis is correct, the thesis of strong AI, strong artificial intelligence, is correct, then if all that's relevant is the pattern here, if the pattern in your brain is what's relevant for having cognition, and you duplicate that pattern even in a different hardware, it's instantiated in a different medium. If you reproduce the pattern of events, okay, well, if that is what's causally relevant in your brain, and you duplicate it in some other hardware, if you duplicate the causes, you duplicate the effects. So presumably, yes. And to answer Quantum's question about if you could download an intelligence, a mind, essentially into a computer, could you double it? Well, sure. I mean, again, if you duplicate the causes, you duplicate the effects, presumably. So in principle, yes. But to say that you could do something in principle when you don't know what the bridge principles are and you don't know what the explanation is a little bit like saying, in principle, we could turn lead into gold. Yes, in principle, we could turn lead into gold, but we don't know how. But in principle, one could. When you don't know how, when you don't know how to do something, you can always say, in principle, we could do it, because it rests on your ignorance.
Well, yeah, and not to derail this even further, but I mean, for me, the interesting question there would be, let's say Oz is right, and we can learn to do this someday, and we do learn to do this someday, and we replicate this huge computer, and we turn the computer on, and lo and behold, it speaks to us. If I turn the computer off, did I murder somebody? And does that have moral implications?
Well, I would say if you in fact created a mind, that is, if you actually created an artificial mind, even if it was instantiated in a completely different hardware and it was thinking, and you just switched it off, that would be no different than if your brain had an off switch, or I installed an off switch in you and I would flick it. You would presumably say, "Don't do that," hands off. And so I would say, yeah, that you're instantiating a person realized in another medium. It wouldn't matter what medium it was realized in; it would still be a person.
Why would that computer have value? I haven't thought about these, so God. But why?
The same reason you have value, because
which is
why you have value?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So we're switching away from mind to.
I'm sorry, I don't want to do that.
No, I don't mind. I'm happy to go there.
But Helena, I don't know that Helena got all her answers. I don't want to derail yet, and if she didn't.
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to go there, but it's
okay. It's okay.
Can I just bring up
because I want to get a thorough explanation from Ozzy, so I'm going to see if I can't corner him separately. So.
If we go to change topics, can I just bring up one thing quickly though, because I thought that's quite relevant to this. Again, it's sorry about using Star Trek, because I like Star Trek, but there was an interesting episode on Star Trek Voyager, which probably means none of you have seen it. It was an episode called Tuvix, and the plot was
my favorite episode.
Neelix and Tuvok, shared a.
Yeah, but I mean, it was. I mean, it's a completely fictitious event. Two different conscious entities were merged into one in a transporter accident, and this Tuvix guy just suddenly started to exist. He had all the memories of both of them, and he enjoyed living. He got used to it. Everyone liked him. And then towards the end of the episode, they discovered how to reverse the process to bring the 2 original characters back, and in the end, the Captain Janeway decided to go ahead with it, but Tuvix didn't consent to that, and he actually wanted to stay alive. So I mean, there's actually been a peer-reviewed paper done on this Star Trek episode because it's raised so many interesting moral questions. What's people's opinion on this?
Well, I think if you merge the 2 people, right, I don't think you don't really have 2 individual identities merged. You have a new identity, which is now a new individual. The other 2 are gone. So in my mind, reversing that is basically killing him and then bringing back to life the 2 people that had already ceased to exist.
I agree with that completely. I think that Tuvik is not 2 people. He's 1 person. Tuvok and Neelix died in a transporter accident, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But this resulted in the creation of a new person, a different person, who just happened to have the memories of those other 2 people. And what Janeway did was assassinate a person in order to resurrect 2 different people.
Right. Yeah.
So she murdered someone in order to bring 2 people back to life.
That bitch. I
No!
never did like Janeway.
Did you see what she's getting involved with right now?
Yeah.
But she says it was an accident.
Yeah.
What's this now? Oh, never mind. I don't know.
I believe it was an accident. I don't have an issue with that.
Yeah, Krauss got mixed up in that too. Yeah.
What about the argument that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few? I mean, you could argue that you're saving 2 lives against 1, but then I suppose on the other hand, you could argue that you're actually resurrecting 2 people.
Yeah, you resurrected. They were already gone.
Yeah.
But what happens? Then what happens, Oz, with the argument? Okay, so we've kind of done the computer and we've done the 2 people to 1. But what happens? For example, I go out and I say that I go out and I rob a 7-Eleven. Okay. And a week or 2 passes, and I get arrested by the police, and I end up in court. Can I not make the argument that Karlton, I'm a composite of all my memories and all my experiences, and that in a very real way, just like Tuvik, from moment to moment, I am not the same person. I am not the same me that I was a second ago. I am a different individual, literally, as time continues to pass, because that composition is different. And therefore, to punish this Karlton that exists now for something that someone named Karlton did 2 weeks ago, who was literally a different persona, is not a just act. That I'm not the same person, other than I share the same body. In the same way that Tuvik, those 2 individuals ended up sharing or becoming a new individual within the same physical frame. Couldn't I make the same argument for myself on an ongoing basis?
No, I don't think you could. That argument presupposes that an individual is only an individual provided that it's unchanging. As soon as it changes state, it ceases to be that individual and becomes something else.
But isn't that how we define individuality? That it is a composite of all our experiences up to that point in time?
Yeah, and but a composite across time includes all of the changes in state. I mean, it'd be like saying that this plant isn't the same plant as it was a minute ago because it's actually grown in the last minute.
Well,
what that would mean is there would be no principle of individuation. There would be literally nothing in the world that is in fact the same now as it was a second ago.
That exists. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, but we don't care about that, right? We don't.
Well, but there's
a reason why we don't care about that. There's a reason why we punish people, individuals. Even though they have different mental states and physiologically they're slightly different across time, and it's because things like punishment and fines and the kinds of consequences that we impose on people change people's behaviors.
But we both argued that Tuvik was not 2 individuals that existed prior. We both argued that those 2 died, and the result was a new individual. But the only thing, but the only thing that made it a new individual was that we added memories to it. We merged the memories, and they basically had a greater set of it had a different set of experiences. That literally is the only thing that changed, and that then produced a different persona. But it was only the set of experiences that changed. So how is changing the set of experiences that way fundamentally different from my experiences changing as time passes?
Oh, okay. Well, the distinction here is pragmatic. The reason we regard you as an individual, the same individual across time, is simply a question of what's that?
Convenience.
Well, it's not just it's not. Yes, it's convenience, but I mean it's principled convenience. It's predictive leverage. It gives us predictive leverage. I can predict your behavior. Whereas if I were to assume that the Karlton I'm answering now is not the same Karlton who asked the question, I'd have no reason to answer the question that I'm answering right now.
So
right?
would you put Tuvik in jail for something that Neelix had done?
No, I would not, because there would be no reason to do that. Those are two different individuals. I will not, by punishing one person, affect the result in the other person. Whereas if I punish you, okay, that is going to be something that's going to modify your behavior. That, I think, is the only reason why we should punish people. It's nothing to do with retribution. It's conditioning their behavior, and that's why I think certain punishments are irrational. If they're not going to do anything, there's no point in imposing those punishments, right? That's why I think certain kinds of retributionary theories of justice are just confused.
Not to mention letting somebody burn in hell when there's no possibility of change or forgiveness. Yeah.
Right. There's simply no point. It's gratuitous. So the reason that we punish people shouldn't be out of vengeance. It should be because this is how you modify people's behavior. It's why we reward people. It's why we punish people. It's why we commend people. It's why we condemn people. It's why we judge people. It's why we change our estimation of people, how we value them, what we think of them, their credibility. That's why it's important not to lie. It's important not to deceive and cheat people. It's important not to write bad checks. Your credibility's on the line, and all of these things affect your reputation, and your reputation matters to you because it affects how it results in different consequences. Having a good reputation, when people think that you're smart and you're kind, you're honorable and trustworthy and a reliable purveyor of information, they listen to you, they heed what you say, they trust you, they will take what you say and act on it in a way that they won't if they think that you're just a bullshitter or a liar or a cheat. So reputation matters.
So you capture me. Sorry, I'm hanging on to this for a second. So I did that 7-Eleven when I was 17, and assuming there's no statute of limitations. Now I'm 35 or 40, and the police capture me and realize I was the perpetrator of the crime. And now I stand up before the judge. I'm like, Judge, I was 17. I was stupid. I went out and drinking the night before. I've never done anything like that before. I never done anything like that since then. I'm a responsible, upstanding citizen. Here I am. Is she obligated to still punish me if the reason for that punishment is to ensure or to affect some type of change?
It's not just individual. The reason we punish people isn't just to do with individual change. It's also to desensitize other people from doing it. So you would still have to be punished, otherwise to maintain the status quo that if you do something wrong, you get punished for it.
Yeah, you have to disincentivize the crime. But Karlton's point is a really good one, because that is in fact what happens. It's an excellent question, because that's what happens when people commit a crime. Especially when they're young, and years go by, and they're apprehended later, or it's discovered, or they confess later. We don't always punish them when we see that the pattern of their life is such that it's clear that they are not disposed to ever commit such a crime again. And that's why we have a statute of limitations on certain crimes. We understand that people should not be beholden to their actions the whole of their lives. There are only a few things, the most heinous crimes, where we think the stakes are so high, we must never let people get away with it. We must always act so as to disincentivize the action for the purposes of other people who might be tempted to try such things. And also, we understand that certain crimes are so heinous that anyone who's capable of these things, the stakes are so high that we never even want to take the chance that we're wrong in thinking they'll never do this again. So when someone... Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish.
I was just going to say, so in the case of the 17-year-old who like does some shoplifting or throws a rock through a store window or some act of vandalism, and then in his late 20s he's married with kids, he's a responsible adult. There's every possibility that a judge will say, well, we're just going to ignore this at this stage. But if the person has a record of being a miscreant ever since then, as a pattern,
Sure.
if the pattern is continued. Even if they're just charges, they beat the rap a number of times, a judge might say, you know what, you're the same person.
Right.
We're going to punish you for this as long as the statute of limitations has not expired yet, has not been exceeded.
Well, the concept of I'm not going to be able to say this word, desensitizing. Well, I'm going to use that word.
No, it's
disincentivizing. Yes.
Yeah.
So if we're punishing people to take away the incentive to think that you can do it and get away with it, that sort of presumes, I think, the idea that there's public knowledge that you actually did that crime. If no one knows you did it, then there's no one's going to know that you're not punished for it. So there's not going to be this sort of implied incentive to go ahead and for somebody else to do it.
But you can't. The trouble with that is you can't make exceptions. It would be like a classroom teacher not disciplining a child for a trivial offence. I mean, also you could think of it in another way that if an individual chooses not to vote, then the individual is not doing anything at all to affect the government. I mean, if one individual doesn't vote, it doesn't have any effect. But then if that individual publicly says he's not going to vote and encourages loads of other people not to vote.
Well, again, yes, that's kind of what I'm saying. Unless there's some public knowledge that that this offense had taken place and that they had caught the perpetrator and then they didn't punish them, that's one thing. But I would think typically if you're capturing people that for crimes that were committed a long time ago, the public in general, the people that you want to take away the incentive from, have no idea that this even happened. So it seems that it's sort of an invented concept that we're doing this to take away the incentive from other potential criminals, because the likelihood that those criminals even know you did this is nil.
No, I don't think that's true.
To extend my analogy, though, couldn't you do that? Couldn't you apply exactly the same logic with the voting example and just say, I'm never going to vote ever again. I'm just not going to tell anyone I'm not going to vote.
Yes.
You could do that.
I don't see why. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure I followed that all the way through. But if I say I'm not going to vote to myself and I don't tell anybody I'm not going to vote, why do you need to make a public spectacle of me or punish me for some reason? I'm not quite following that.
Okay, we're never concerned about the sort of the rare exception where someone we think, yeah, maybe we shouldn't punish him because he's been a good egg ever since then, but the statute of limitations hasn't run out. But it's a serious crime. We want to disincentivize. We never worry about the fact that maybe someone will never find out about it. Okay. People can find out about these things, which is why we in fact publicize convictions, right? We do in fact publicize these things.
That's the point. Is we're creating the very problem that we're ostensibly trying to solve by then incarcerating them, that everybody now knows, but we're the ones that broadcast it.
Well, no. We should broadcast. I think
Really?
We should broadcast. Yeah, for the same reason that we broadcast laws. We want people to know what the laws are. We don't want to have secret laws that people are violating, and right. The reason we have laws that are public, right? I mean, it's hard to believe this, but this is an innovation. There were times, and there are places in the world to this day where laws are secret, where people violate laws that they don't know they're violating, and they're dragged in and prosecuted for laws they didn't know they were in violation of and couldn't have known, right? It strikes us obviously as unjust that there should be laws that you couldn't be aware of. It's one thing to say, well, look, you didn't know, but that you could have known. But it's another thing to say you didn't know and you couldn't have known. We can't prosecute people for laws that they couldn't possibly have known they were in violation of. Which is why we make our laws. But such laws are unjust, right? Which is why we insist that laws have to be enacted by our government, by our representatives. The laws need to be made public and stuff like that. This is different from saying the evidence all has to be made public and stuff like that, but our laws are supposed to be publicly available, right?
Well, yeah, but we sort of have that here, whether in the UK or Canada or wherever, in the sense that ignorance of the law is no excuse.
No, that's different. No, ignorance of the law is based entirely on pragmatics. It is impossible to enact laws and publicize them so as to ensure that everybody knows them. That's impossible. Okay, so we just say ignorance of the law is no excuse. But what would be an excuse, a legitimate excuse, would be to say the law was enacted and it was kept secret so that nobody could know it, could find out about it. It wasn't written down anywhere.
Yeah,
okay?
but
that would be unjust. That would be a legitimate excuse in any fair court.
But
right?
I'm arguing that in some cases ignorance of the law would indeed be an excuse. Clearly no one can learn all the laws that there are, and if you're performing a particularly complex activity, you don't do anything particularly immoral. I suspect that everyone in this room has broken some law at some point that they haven't known. Some sort of trivial law, perhaps.
Sure, but you can be convicted for violating laws that you didn't know existed, provided that it was possible in principle for you to know that the laws existed. But
it's still the case that none of us are in jail now, even though at some.
But it's because no one knows that we did it.
Yeah, but realistically, everyone has broken the law at some point in the sense that.
Well, I think I see what I was saying. I think it can go either way. Certainly, I saw a thing on Google the other day. There was a preacher who had to renege on something he had said from the pulpit because he had on TV encouraged people across the country who had firearms that they weren't using to send them all to him in the mail so he could then sell them and use the money for the ministry, until he found out, since he's not a registered gun dealer, that was illegal. And he had to say, yeah, you go sell the gun, write me a check. But certainly he could have been in prison for that, and maybe that was actually the reason that he came back out and changed his mind publicly. But the other side to the coin is, I don't think we're always in prison for things that we could have known that are illegal. For example, if I have a tax audit done, I may take a deduction that clearly is in violation of the law. I missed that law. I didn't realize that was in violation. I was good faith. I thought that was the right thing to do. The guy's going to catch it. I'm probably not going to go to jail for that.
But that's
even though clearly I could be punished somehow.
But that's because in the law there are two components. Okay, you have to commit the act, and the second one is the mens rea condition. The mens rea condition is sometimes it just means the mental thing. It's the mental component of the law of a crime, and it's sometimes translated as sort of the guilty mind. But it just means the mental component. It has nothing to do with whether or not you feel guilty. It's whether or not you understand that you are committing the act under that description. And so in the case that you described there, that kind of thing happens all the time. You say, officer, I had no idea that I was breaking the law. Well, ignorance of the law is no excuse. But if you were in fact acting in good faith, that is a mitigating circumstance, and in mitigating circumstances, mitigating factors like this can militate against you even being charged, not just the sentencing. So,
it's arguable that that's equivalent then, isn't it? People are discharged for breaking the law because they have been ignorant. So even though technically ignorance of the law is no excuse.
Yeah, ignorance of the law is no excuse.
But technically, it kind of is.
No. You're misunderstanding what it means to say ignorance of the law is no excuse. It means you cannot insist that just because you didn't know that you get off. It doesn't mean that the other side cannot exercise discretion and let you off. It means it is not your right to say you may not convict me because I was ignorant. That's what it means. It doesn't mean that you are always to be convicted. It means you are never to be exonerated
solely because you didn't know.
Simply because you didn't know. Okay, that will be left to the discretion of the other side there. That's what it means. It's sort of one-sided. It doesn't work both ways. Both parties don't get to exercise this privilege.
Quick side question. I'm sorry, I'm hopscotching all over. Oz, can you give me a 10-word what you think of A.C. Grayling?
I'm not familiar with his philosophy. I've only heard him talk about atheism and stuff like that. I haven't actually read anything by A.C. Grayling.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Sorry to... That was a quick stop. So I just got a book by him. That's all, and I'm reading it. So
oh,
just curious.
shortest answer I've ever given to any question.
Returning to the point, I see what you're saying, but in essence, laws are a public interest thing, and to a certain extent, context is always taken into account.
Right.
The fact that I mean, you go on about rights, but in a sense, a right is only a technical semantic in a way. If you're going to be discharged on the basis that you're ignorant, it's still, even though technically ignorance of the law isn't an excuse, it still proximally is in the sense that you can get away with a crime if you're ignorant of it in a society.
Yeah, it just means that, well, the word right is apropos here. It is not your right to plead ignorance of the law in order to escape punishment, right, when you violate a law, right? That's what it means. Right. So it is something that you can appeal and say, listen, I didn't know, and I hope that takes, that they understand that the circumstances warrant that you be excused in such a case. It's in the public interest, but it is not your right. It's not sort of your trump card. It's not like saying I plead the fifth. You know, you can always plead the fifth. You know, but what you're not allowed to do is plead ignorance and expect that will be honored, because it is not a right that you have to escape prosecution simply by virtue of some piece of ignorance.
Do you think should restitution be part of the judicial punishment system? I know if we're incarcerating people primarily to affect, well, primarily I guess to protect society, secondarily to affect some change in the perpetrator so we can put them back in society, should restitution be part of that? And how would you address non-property restoration? You know, if the guy kills your child, the guy, you know, runs you over, a hit and run, and you are in a wheelchair the rest of your life. How do you address that kind of restitution?
I don't know enough about this, actually. My understanding is that a lot of these things get addressed in civil court, in civil prosecutions. Not
I just mean your personal opinion, though. I mean, in terms of how do you think we should force people to provide some restitution in those cases, or no?
I haven't read much about this. I don't know much about the pros and cons. My intuition, if you want to know, I mean, for what that's worth, is my intuition is I think that's a dangerous road to go down, unless there's some principled way of deciding. You know, if someone loses a hand because of someone's negligence or something like that, or malice, you know, and you want to say I demand to be recompensed for the loss of my hand. Unless you have some principled way of doing this, I don't know how you can do it. Like, actually in Canada, we have things like that. Like, you know, if you lose a hand, there's a dollar value that's assigned to that. It's written in law. It's not left up to some jury to decide how much you're going to be recompensed or something like that.
Does it matter if it's your left hand or right hand?
Yeah, if it depends if it's the dominant. Everyone has a dominant hand, right? So obviously, right. And if you're a pianist, for instance, you know, you would. You know,
get more, hopefully.
You get more, yeah. There's not like a formula, but I mean there are guidelines. There's some kind of principle that goes behind this. I'm told, by the way.
That's interesting.
So, yeah, I don't know anything about this, and I don't know any lawyers, so Canadian lawyers. So I could be getting this all wrong. This is going on memory of a law student friend of mine. Who reported this to me years ago, so I don't know how accurate it is for Canada, but I'm told that that's how it works. And this arose in the context of a discussion about someone, some kind of absurd case in the U.S. where some woman had spilled hot coffee on herself at McDonald's drive-thru. Yeah, and I'm told that story is somewhat exaggerated, but. It was when that happened. There was a lot of talk in Canadian news about how our system differs from that. That it's not left to a jury to decide damages in this way, and there's some more principled formulas that they follow.
I can't think of anything worse than letting a jury decide anything. When I lived in Atlanta, I had an opportunity. There was a firm that was employed to come down and set up a mock trial. It was done by I think it was the insurance company that actually paid them to do this, because they were entering into a medical malpractice suit, and they wanted to get a sense for what kind of damages they would be risking in this trial. So they had 20 of us there for all day Saturday, and the guy presented both the prosecution's and the defense's case, very dispassionately, kind of laid out all the documentation, said here's what one side says, here's what the other side says, here's what the facts are, and the basic case revolved around a woman who had a 7-year-old child who went in to have some what should have been minor surgery. I don't know if it was an appendectomy or something relatively minor. And due to the supposedly due to the surgeon's negligence, there was a blood clot. The brain flow to the brain stopped, and the result was that this child was now going to be mentally retarded and would effectively be at 7 years old for the rest of his life and would require professional care at home for the rest of his life. Okay, couldn't feed himself, couldn't dress himself, that type of thing. All right, so that was sort of the case in a nutshell, and we spent all day there with these guys doing this, and at the end they went around this room of 20 people, and they asked them 2 questions, or 3 actually. They asked them, first of all, do you think the surgeon was culpable? Secondly, would you award punitive damages? And if so, how much would you award for the lifetime for however long the child lived in total? What would you award for punitive damages? And then they asked for some sort of an explanation. Right? So we're going around the room, and I can remember about halfway around the room, I'm thinking, oh my God, if I am ever arrested for anything, I will take the judge. I don't care if it's a hanging judge. I will take him over these people who seem to have no idea what we've talked about for the last 6 hours. And then we got to the last person, the worst of the group, who said that she thought the surgeon was guilty, and she would award punitive damages, and for the lifetime of the child, keep in mind this child's only 7 now, he's going to live a normal lifespan, for the lifetime of this child, she was going to award a total of $12,000. I'm like, what? I'm like, is this so the parents can buy an escape car and leave? I mean, what are you gonna do for 50 years with $12,000 when you got to have professional home care for the kids? I mean, it was completely absurd. And now I forgot why I went down this road. I think other than to say, when it comes to awarding money, yeah, the stupidity of juries is it's frightening.
Yeah, well, that's one of my concerns with sort of compensation and restitution and stuff like that. It seems to me that the guidelines have to be encoded in law first. Otherwise, there could be some gross miscarriages of justice or failures of justice where it should be, where more proper restitution is deserved. But as I said, I don't know enough about this, and so
just curious. Yeah.
Just my hunches on this.
Anyway,
I have to get going. I'm sorry to cut out. I have to get going though. Supper's on here.
Gotcha. Oz.
All right.
Thank you, Ozzy.
Always a good time, Oz. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah. Likewise. Thank you.
It was good to actually understand you today.
I'm delighted, James. That's very encouraging. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Helen, are you still there? Oh man, Helena hates me.
No. I'm here.
I'm jumping off a cliff.
I couldn't get the unmute to work. I'm here.
I love your little doggies in the basket. That's really cool.
No, I figured. Well, I'll tell you about it later.
That's fine. Hey, can I ask maybe this isn't never mind. When I talk to you later, I have a question for you. How's that?
Absolutely wonderful. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, sorry I derailed that conversation all over the place.
I'd like to point out something. I'm sorry.
What's that, Mordred?
And that is the unfortunate fact that your picture, although it appears to be a handbasket, doesn't appear to be functioning as a handbasket. It appears to be more of a mouth basket. So. Poor choice of picture.
Is that a word, a mouth basket? Maybe, I don't know. I'm not sure if that's what I would envision with that word either.
her basket is fine. It just happens to be
a mouth basket.
That was a silly joke.
Mouth basket.
Oh, it's hilarious.
I like that. That's cute. Oh my.
So that was pretty good for a topic we had no clue where to begin with.
Yeah, today we had some really interesting. I've had some really interesting ones today. Bizarrely, I had the one guy. He's a very who's this guy? I can't remember his name now. I've seen him before. Brother Mike. Anybody else know Brother Mike?
Does he have a monk avatar?
Yep, that's him.
I don't know him, but I have seen him. I wasn't sure who he was.
He's an
I've
odd.
talked to him before a couple of times.
Yeah, he seems
Yeah.
to be an odd character. He is he's Christian, he's a theist at least, and he's his secular work. He designs, if I remember right, he designs power plants or power the piping for nuclear power stations, which is kind of an odd thing. He's working on some sort of a philosophical construct for objective morality. So. He was asking me to. I don't know why he was asking me. He asked me, but he asked me to see if I could find some holes for him. I'm always happy to go find holes for people. So, but yeah, he was a nice guy. Then we had to talk about with some other guy about in math. We were talking about infinite sets, potential infinities and actual infinities, and I kept getting hung up and keep saying actual infinities. The word doesn't make sense. And we kept arguing about that for a while. That was fun. And we talked about something else. I don't remember. But it was good. I just don't remember what that was now. It was more of a religious thing. Oh. Yeah. Oh, it was mind. It was this. It was mind and brain. That's right. It was with Sportsman something. James, you were there for that. All right, sports.
Super Sport?
Super Sport. Yeah, Super Sport. There you go, Super Sport. So we had a nice discussion with Super Sport this morning about that.
We were talking about that earlier before
that
you
was
guys
what
were on.
started this whole discussion.
Yeah, I want to finish that conversation with him. I really do.
There's no ending it.
Well, maybe not, but nonetheless, I got some new ideas I want to try out. So he seems like a good.
Will they make him question whether his God is right?
Well, I doubt. I don't know. I doubt any of my arguments will do that. I
probably won't even listen to you.
Oh, I want to try and control the topic with him and narrow it down just to the question of whether it is rational to Carl can't talk, whether it's rational to
and now we're talking about abortion. I just aborted the conversation.
To accept an assertion without evidence. Yeah. Do we get abortion going? Where did that come from?
No. I was aborting. Never mind. Carry on.
Yes, sir. Okay. All right. Very well. Yeah. I don't know. Abortion's one of those topics that I really do. I could be on either side of that fence.
I was saying before that it's just it's situational. It's always got to be situational. Like, I don't know how you could say you just have one stance. You know, I mean, every particular situation is different. So I'm not going to say I'm, necessarily for abortion or against abortion, because it's there's obviously times where I'm for it in the sense that I think it should be available as an option.
Well, I guess that's really. Yeah, that's really the question, I guess. I mean, I agree that I think there's always exceptions or situations that I would even disagree with myself, because of, how bizarre or how, whatever, sad or whatever the situation was. But I think as just a sort of a general concept as far as whether I'm pro-life or pro-choice, I mean, do I think a mother should just arbitrarily have the ability to abort a child at any point in the gestation process for any reason, or do I think that
that doesn't
life is somehow sacred? But if my problem here is, or sacred's a bad word, but my problem here is if life is sacred or valued, maybe I should say, what makes it valuable? When does it become valuable, and why? And why isn't a frog's life valuable in the same way? So that's always where I sort of get stuck, and I think there's a lot of people that disagree with where I end up, but that's okay. I think there's a lot of room here to be sort of all over the map on this one.
I think that felt like a different topic, different sort of situation. The parallels between animals and human life, and what's worth, whether you could justify one being worth more or not. I mean, I think that you can. in many ways.
I'd be interested to hear how you would. I mean, where I end up. Just so I'll put my cards out there first, and I'm curious to see where you would end up. I end up at the conclusion that I think that for example, I think the Catholic Church can be justified in that they say all life is sacred, and they draw the line at conception. That's sort of their arbitrary line. From that point forward, it's a life, and it's valuable. Other people may say that the same thing, that life is valuable, but they sort of draw an arbitrary line maybe at a particular place in the gestation cycle. 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, whatever. Other people maybe draw it at birth. When you cut the umbilical cord. To me, it seems that it's sentience or self-awareness is what makes it us special, or makes us different than a pig, a bird, or whatever, a snake. But I think the problem that I have is that, well, when are we self-aware? When do we become sentient? I don't think we're sentient at 1 month, or certainly not at conception. I'm not sure that we're sentient at 9 months. I'm not sure that we're sentient at 2 or 3 years old. Or for that matter, maybe not 2 or 5 or 6. I don't know when sentience really appears, and I don't think it appears at the same precise moment, certainly for everybody. And so I sort of draw an arbitrary line, and I say, once it's out of the womb, I think it deserves the protection of law. But I don't really think it's sentient at that point. So I don't like my own position, because I feel like it's inconsistent in a way.
Well,
I'm interested in why you switched from. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say quickly that there certainly is things that if you do to a 2-month-old, or if you do certain thing, if you did certain things to it, cause it harm, or kept it in certain environments, it's going to impact it later on. So, and it's going to impact its own. Understanding of itself, if that makes sense. He's not going to be able to function socially correctly if you keep it isolated and don't speak to him, and these types of things. So, I mean, it only seems to become relevant once you can remember your experience, in a sense. And I mean, in terms of, obviously, the process of having a child, you need to be able to, you want ideally to be able to have financial, you'd be able to support the child at the other, once it's there, foreseeable, be able to see that you can support the child, be there for the child, because children need emotional support and these other sorts of things. And if you can tick all those boxes, you should go ahead with the pregnancy. If you can't tick those sorts of boxes, I think that's when abortion should start coming into the equation. But it should be a process, and discuss it in that way. But I certainly don't think that you're, I mean, just deciding what's ultimately best for the child before it's even born is, I think, valid. But yeah.
What about Helena? You were going to say something?
Well, first, did you say you think it is valid or it's invalid?
Which?
I was talking to.
Oh, sorry, Mordred. Okay.
Oh, I think. I was
just
saying
didn't hear you. Did you say you think it's valid or it's invalid? Yeah, deciding
it's
ahead of time.
It's valid. Yeah, it's valid to do so. But based on this sort of if you fall pregnant, it's perfectly reasonable to just analyze what's the potential life going to be for this child. Is it going to be are the circumstances going to be decent enough circumstances? The child's not going to be starving. It's not going to be suffering. Then it probably should go ahead. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if it's going to go through suffering, and if it's going to go through potential trauma and these types of things, then I can't see why abortion couldn't be discussed. That's what I was saying. So I'm saying it's valid.
It is valid. Okay.
So, yeah.
I thought you had another one earlier than that, Helen.
Oh yeah, I was curious. You used the word sentient, and we have never used that word this whole hangout. And yet that word, sentient and conscious,
yes.
Consciousness and sentience, often go hand in hand. So I'm just curious, what caused you to say sentient there, and maybe we can tease out the distinction.
Oh, well, to be quite frank, I don't think I've given any thought to the distinction. I always use the word sentient when I talk about abortion. That's just the word that's part of that speech. Is it different than consciousness?
Isn't sentient like
I,
you're a sentient being? It's
I,
just
I,
identifying that you're a sentient
yeah, I
being
mean, when I
by
think of,
definition.
yeah, when I think of being sentient, I basically think of being self-aware, that I recognize that I am me. Um, and I don't know how much more detailed that I could be with the word sentient. Um, uh,
Apparently, I'm lying. Apparently, it's a sentient being is a Buddhist term. I had no idea. There you go. I just picked
that's
that up
weird.
in common vernacular, and then I just threw that out there without
Well,
knowing what it was.
well,
So
Helena,
Well,
yeah,
the self-aware
no,
distinction is kind of the one I go by as
yeah,
a layperson. I mean, when I think about Star Trek,
exactly.
yeah,
I think of
means
Commander
Data,
that's how
Data.
right?
I was.
Was Data
Yes,
sentient or
exactly.
not, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Well, I think, but I'm in a quandary, and here's that's half of my argument, I guess. The other half that sort of has me in this quandary is this: women very often will argue that this is their body, and that
Women were.
while the child is there, internal, that they have a right to the processes and the things that go on in their own body. And no, and let me start off by saying nobody is on either side is making an argument to trivialize abortion, but they're just saying that should push come to shove and a decision need to be made. I think a lot of women would argue that it is their decision to make, and that they shouldn't be bound by the fact that there is a developing child or a fetus inside. Um, here's where this kind of I haven't resolved this. If you walk, I do it by example. If you're walking on a trail with your girlfriend or boyfriend, okay, let's say a mountainside trail, and the some of the roadway or the trail gives way, and your significant other falls off the cliff, off the roadway, is going to tumble to their death. Um, if you if you if you don't do anything, I mean, you might scream, but if you don't do anything and they tumble to their death, no court is going to no court is going to say that you are obligated to have put your life at risk in order to save them. Okay, it may be a nice thing to do, but no one's going to arrest you because you didn't do that. I'm assuming here you didn't push them off the cliff, right? It was just an act of nature; they fell. But now, what happens? And this is where I think this is more like what abortion is to me. Now, what happens if your significant other, the ground gives way and they fall, and just like in the movies, right? You leap forward on your stomach and you reach over the edge and you grab them by the wrist and you got them. All right, you got them.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
Yeah.
and there they are. And then while you got them there, right, their life is in your hands. They are completely dependent on you to pull them back up. But while you got them there, you go, I really don't like the way you cook, and you haven't been ironing my shirts lately. And they say, screw you, and they let go. And then you fall to your death. I think certainly in a court, they would say that at that juncture, because you had committed yourself to saving that person or to being the support for that person, that you are then obligated to follow through on that and to save their life. And by choosing and changing your mind midstream is tantamount to murder, just as though you had pushed them off the cliff. And I have to wonder how that is different from abortion, in the sense
Well,
that
I can think of one difference.
well, okay, I'm assuming okay, I am assuming that the person who got pregnant intended to get pregnant. Okay.
Okay, well then there's my difference gone.
Yes, I thought that might be it. In other words, that they intended to, or at the very least, that they. I'm not. Let's just say I'm not talking about rape, as a manner of getting pregnant. Now, if they go out and voluntarily have sex, and they know the risks, and maybe they don't take precaution because they're in the heat of passion, or they just decide not to, or they don't have $1.50 for a condom, then I think that's the same as planning to get pregnant. Okay, there's a risk there.
Hold on.
You know it, and you took it. Yeah.
Hold on. In your analogy, one could look at your analogy and say that the having sex is kind of analogous to deciding to go on the hike.
Oh, I think having sex.
You know
is
the risks involved. You know you could fall off the cliff. You
maybe.
decide to go on a hike. Anyway, right?
I think having sex is more analogous to the leap to save your partner. That there is a risk to your own life in doing it, but you choose to do it anyway.
Okay.
I mean, kind of.
How
There
come
just aren't a lot
that's-
of. Yeah. Sorry. Go on.
That's
Go
okay.
ahead.
How come what?
No, go
Oh,
ahead.
no.
Somebody
I
ask
was
a
just gonna
question.
say-
How come you see
No.
that? Explain why that's. Explain that. Why do you think that's more analogous?
Well, it's not a perfect analogy. I just think that, in other words, I think that because I think both actions entail potential risk. So, in other words, if you're going to have unprotected sex, right, you are going into something that you know has a very real danger of getting you pregnant, all right? But you're
Same
willing.
with hiking on a very dangerous
Okay,
cliff.
maybe, but I think the difference here is that is that because you know that having sex entails this danger, okay, and you know what that danger is, then I think the very fact of having that sex, let's say unprotected, okay, is tantamount to accepting the responsibility of the consequence. So it's the same as the person who dives for you. There is a very real risk there in terms of doing that, but if they do it, then they have accepted the obligation that goes along with catching the person who's falling.
Well,
Sure, but you need
it
to be
sounds like
careful.
you're trying to
You need to be very
connect
careful not
based
to.
on risk. Mordred,
Kind.
I'm
You need-
so sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, it's okay. I just wanted to say you need to sort of be careful when because if you say there's a risk when you make something like if you say abortion's legal, you can think of plenty of examples where both partners were irresponsible. They didn't use any protection. They didn't have any sort of plan involved of becoming pregnant and these types of things. And that's why usually there's reasonably hefty. It's reasonably expensive, or at least but it wouldn't be right to not allow people who genuinely perhaps what if she forgot to take a pill that morning? She thought she'd taken it. She's taken it every day.
Well, that's a different.
And she happens
That's
to
different. That's a mistake. That's a mistake. I'm not talking about that. Let me clarify this. Okay.
But this is why
a mistake is one thing. I'm talking about a conscious decision. So what I'm saying, I think, let me rephrase this. Maybe I can do this better. What I'm saying is that if a person decides to have sex and they decide for whatever reason to have unprotected sex intentionally, right? They don't buy the condom. They're too lazy. They heat of the moment, whatever it is. But they know what they're doing. In other words, they know. In other words, they know.
Because the guy doesn't want to put on a condom.
Well, that's fine. But I'm saying.
Come on.
Wait a minute.
Well,
Let me finish.
I just want to say something. I just want to say something here. I'm a young male. Every sexual experience I've been in, I've had to be the one to go, hang on, should I get a condom? Like the girl is every time just sort of going, whatever you want to do.
All right.
Anyway.
My point is that if you have sex unprotected by design, you intend to do that, okay? It's not I forgot to take my pill, okay? All right.
Yes.
If you do that, then I think that you go into the same bucket as the person who is intentionally trying to have a baby if you do get pregnant. I don't think that you can do that intentionally unprotected, then get pregnant and then say, I should be treated like I got raped. Well, no. Because you went into this knowing that possibility existed and you accepted that risk. Therefore, you should be treated as though that was your intent.
Here's the problem I have with trying to make the metaphor be, to force the metaphor to be at the point that you leave.
Okay, maybe it's not
related.
At the point
I think it's related to amount of risk, right?
Okay.
I mean, the chances of you getting pregnant are much lower than the situation that you're trying to make it analogous to, which is leaping to grab the hand. It's much more, to me, analogous to deciding to go on the hike.
Okay. All right. I can buy that. I didn't mean to try and force the analogy. I guess I was just trying to.
And I'm not actually. I'm also just talking, right? I'm not actually convinced by myself. I'm just,
But
playing.
you see what my dilemma is. So my dilemma sort of is, on the one side, I think that abortion should be fine because a fetus is not sentient. On the other side, I have this problem that it's like leaping for the guy on the cliff, because once you get pregnant, right, assuming it wasn't forced on you, once you get pregnant, then you have consciously made a choice and you've accepted an obligation to care for a life. And I think to renege on that obligation at some point midway in the process is tantamount to letting the guy go when you've got his wrist. You've accepted that responsibility, and now to change your mind is killing that person, isn't it? And I don't have an answer here. I'm just asking, please. So don't no hate mail. For anybody watching, no hate mail, please.
Well, you're killing what could possibly be that person. You can't get around that. But I mean, it's about weighing costs.
But that's the point. Is I shouldn't be allowed. The law doesn't allow me to change my mind and let that guy drop off the cliff once I've grabbed his hand. There is no reason that I can offer them to say that this was justified. I can't say I have a roast in the oven and I need to get home quick, so I let him go. No one's going to let you off. And so by the same constraint, I'm saying, then why should we allow a woman who is pregnant to say, I've changed my mind, I decided now I don't want to have children, or I don't think that I'm going to be a good mother, or I want to get an abortion because I don't want my parents to find out, whatever the situation is. But why should that excuse or that reason be considered justified when it wouldn't be justified in terms of letting somebody off the cliff?
But to be clear,
that's not the excuse.
That reason isn't justified for a late-term abortion. I mean, in the UK, we don't allow late-term abortions unless there's a medical necessity for them.
What's the difference between the week after conception and 8.5 months? If the child is still not sentient, what's the difference?
There's a significant difference in terms of...
Well, why don't you might as well just be saying that if you're gonna, if you decide to try and impregnate someone and then you don't actually, your sperm spills on the ground, you've just murdered potential child there.
I'm not talking about potential. This is
It is a potential.
It's a human being. No. It's a human being.
So
the sperm's not a human being.
What the fetus is?
Yes, the fetus is a human being. It's biologically a human being.
The cell sac from which the
biological
body starts.
If you do an examination of the DNA, it's a human being. I mean, that's a genus and species.
Hang on, but I don't think it serves to get too bogged down in looking at this discretely, because if you look at a banana, that contains a lot of human DNA. I think the reason why we use something like 21 weeks as a benchmark, I don't think it's anything to do with whether the baby is self-aware, but at that point, it would cause the baby significant distress to be aborted. So it's clear that I think it's reasonably apparent that the baby can feel pain at that point, and whereas a ball of cells...
I agree it can feel pain, but so can a cow that gets beat over the head when it's getting ready to be made into hamburger. We don't protect the cow.
Well, actually,
you can kill it in a way that it's unaware that it's being killed in such a way that it doesn't. So therefore, it wouldn't feel.
That's back to awareness. The baby's not aware it's going to be killed either.
Actually, the cow argument. What I would say there is, I would say that's an example of anthropomorphocentrism. I think I brought this up on one of the Magic Sandwiches, but I don't think. I mean, as a society, we do things like kill cows. I don't think we should, on the basis that we don't need to. There's no legitimate. There's no.
Okay, yeah, I agree. Well, I agree. I agree with that, but I think it's a different question, right? I mean, I think that the fact we shouldn't, but we do. So I guess what I'm asking though is, if the cow is not sentient and the embryo or the fetus is not sentient, then what differentiates them?
Well,
in this
case, I would say that killing the cow is the thing that we're doing wrong. Rather than aborting the fetus at a late stage without some. I mean,
But you can still say of the cow that if the cow was going to die of a slow disease soon, that it would be reasonable to, you know, to kill it. And again, it sort of goes back to the whole thing about, I know it's difficult, but, you know, a horrible life for, you know, a child.
Well, this is a slippery slope argument. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, I agree with you, but I mean, a worm has a nervous system. A worm probably feels some sort of pain, but I don't think anybody is out trying to ban fishing, and we certainly could use lures instead of worms. Well, let me just throw one more monkey wrench into the works. I don't have an answer, guys. I'm just trying to be, you know, trying to get things going here. But here's the other side to this abortion thing, right? Because I heard a couple people mention potential life, potential child, potential human being. Okay, so let me be my own devil's advocate for a moment, and go and do a Star Trek analogy, since everybody likes Star Trek. We have Lieutenant Commander Data, who is arguably a sentient, an artificial sentient being. Okay, he's self-aware. All right. Now, if we were to go back to Dr. Sung's laboratory, Nunyan Sung, and we were to see him as he was constructing Data, and Dr. Sung had not even just barely begun. All he had on the floor is he had a bunch of circuit boards and wires and metal pieces there. Okay, no one would have an objection to me taking a sledgehammer and smashing all that. No one would say, well, that's a potential android. That's a potential sentient being. You can't do that. And I think even if he was halfway done, maybe he did everything but screw the head on or turn the switch, for that matter. Okay, he had put, you know, all these things are together. It's still just a pile of wires. So if I put them in a compactor and crunched them all up again because I wanted to start over, nobody would complain that that was murder because he was a potential sentient android. So why do we make the same complaint when we abort a fetus? Why do we say it's a potential human being? So what?
My main problem was because you said that you know, it's still a human, and I'm asking you, when is it a human? Because you got the sperm meeting.
It's a human biologically at conception.
No, it's not.
Sure it is.
If it was,
let me ask you a question. Let me ask a question.
That were the case. After morning after pill, even the way the pill worked.
But wait a minute. Let me ask a question. Okay, let me ask a question. I don't think anybody will argue. Let me backstep. I don't think anybody will argue that after conception that it is living. Would you agree with me that it is life as opposed to non-life like a rock? Is it alive?
No.
I have a point.
Who says no?
I said no.
You say there's nothing. It's not living?
No.
Well, then it can't grow.
No, that's not true. I didn't say it's not growing. It's not living. It is not self-sustaining.
I didn't say self-sustaining. That's different. I said, is it alive?
It's not alive because it is not self-sustaining.
Well, there are two states. There are alive.
Karlton, if you'd let me finish and stop talking, I'll explain it to you.
All right.
It's not one of the 6 definitions of life is self-sustaining. A fetus of the tissue, up until it has a heart and a nervous system, is not technically alive because it's not self-sustaining. The mother is sustaining that life through her hormones and the placenta. It's feeding it and helping it grow. There is a point when, yes, it definitely becomes a living mass of tissue. But the first, I don't know, I've heard as many as 150 to the first 150 cells are undifferentiated cells. That's what they would call stem cells. There's no life in them. They're just cells. They're tissue.
But cells, tissue.
It's just. If you were to take a piece of your skin, a cell of your skin, is that alive?
If it's not a dead surface cell, yes, it's either dead or alive. So let's say it's because it's living. It requires food.
It does not have the ability to sustain itself.
Can I just point something out here? Because
yes, please.
I have a point that's completely orthogonal to the points that you're making.
Okay.
Which is, you're both trying to argue this from a rational standpoint, and I think you do have some really valid arguments. But my problem is that I genuinely think humans are anthropomorphocentric, which basically means we're selfish and we don't care about anything else except ourselves. So I think that that's a legitimate reason that we do value human life above other life for absolutely no legitimate reason at all. And I think that reason is purely selfish Yes, and I don't
It's the
think
case for every species, though. It's the case for every species.
But wait a minute,
I mean,
I want to get back to.
you couldn't say that a dog thinks that another species.
I want to
more
get back to James's
any
description.
importance,
I
I
want to
mean,
hear
it's
this
just.
because I'm sorry.
no.
I'm sorry. My bad. I wasn't. My bad. I just want to get back to James's definition because when I look and I realize there are a lot of definitions, but I'm very simple. I'm just looking at. I just Googled definition of life. Okay, and the definition that comes up seems reasonable to me. It says the condition that distinguishes animals and plants from inorganic matter, including the capability for growth, reproduction, functional activity, and continual change preceding death. In other words, things are either inorganic, they're not alive, or they are alive. If I take a blood cell from my veins, that blood cell is not inanimate. It is not dead. It is not inorganic. It is a living cell.
Read it again. Slower. Read it slower.
The condition that distinguishes animals and plants from inorganic matter, including, not necessarily, but including the capacity for growth, for reproduction, for functional activity, and continual change preceding death.
Okay, so if any of those components aren't being met by the tissue, it's not alive by definition.
Okay. The tissue has the capacity for growth. The tissue reproduces itself. The cells reproduce. The cells have functional activity, and the cells continually change until they die. So what didn't it meet?
It's a cell. It's not not a form. It's just a bunch of cells.
But they're alive. That's my point. It's living. That's all I'm saying.
It's not. They're not self-replicating in that sense. They don't. It's hard to explain, but if the definition that they give there says more than you think it's saying.
Well, no, it says exactly what it says. It's not. I'm not making it mad. I'm not making it up. I'm not inferring anything. I'm reading exactly what it says. I mean, things are either alive or they're not alive. The rock on my table is not alive. The blood coursing through my veins is living cells.
But you're talking inorganic and organic material. You're not talking about alive or not alive. They're not the same thing.
If I take a skin cell, if I take a skin cell off if I scratch a skin cell off of me, or better yet, if I take part of my fingernail, okay.
Fingernails are already dead tissue.
Yes, they're dead tissue, but they are organic. But they're not alive. Yes.
So
they're not living.
They're not growing. Right, the ends of my nails not growing. It grows from the cuticle. The ends of my fingernails are not growing. They're dead. The end of my hair is not living. It's dead. Okay, but it's organic. All I'm saying is, after conception, the cell cluster is living. If it was dead, we would never get a baby.
It's a sperm. Sperm's living.
Okay, yes, I understand that, but this was only part one of my question. I didn't think we would get stuck on this. If we can agree that after conception that those cells are living,
I won't
they are alive.
That I won't grant you that at all.
Okay, well, you're the only person I know in the world that wouldn't say that they were alive.
I'm
honest in saying that. I don't think anybody else would say that they're not alive, because if they're dead, they're not going to grow at all. Dead things don't grow.
No, every country, lots of countries around the world, the laws in Australia, the laws in the UK, the laws in Canada reflect this.
No, you're talking about a life that has legal protection. That's not what I mean. I'm just saying that it's alive, as opposed to being dead. That it's alive. That's all I'm saying is it's alive. I'm not saying more, because if we let's move on. I don't want to beat this in the ground.
No, I know what you're saying.
But just for the sake of this, my second question is this: if it's alive, okay, all living things, okay, all living plants, all living animals, all right, that we know about, everything falls into classifications in terms of kingdom, phylum, family, genus, species, and I probably got them out of order, and that's okay, right? But they all fall into that classification. Therefore, after conception, that group of cells would be classified somewhere
Karlton,
in the.
It's fine. It's fine. But it's important.
My internet connection. It's like my router renews at least every 2 hours. I missed everything he said.
Okay. Oh. I was just going to say that.
Sorry about that. I wish I didn't have to, but I really want to catch what you started the question and then you froze because my internet renewed. It's bleep. It's
okay. I just said if for the sake of the discussion we can temporarily assume that those cells are living, Okay, they're alive as opposed to dead. That's all. If we can just assume that for a moment, then all I was saying was that everything, all plants and all animals that we know of, right, are divided into, kingdom, phyla, family, genus, class, genus, species, right, and so forth. We categorize everything that's alive that we know about, right? So if those cells are alive after conception, then the very simple question is, where do they fall in that tree? Well, the only place they can fall is Homo sapiens sapien. That's what those cells are. They are human beings in that sense. Biologically, those cells after conception will never turn into a pig, a bird, a lizard, or a rock. They will always grow up to be a full-formed human being, because that's what they are. They are human beings. Okay, and I forgot why I'm making that argument now, but my point was simply that that's what they are. Now I forgot, and to be honest with you, now I forgot where we were. So
that's okay.
I think it's probably worth moving on from this.
Okay, that's fine. Sure.
I think. I was pointing out that I think this was a very interesting diversion, but I don't think it's all.
Can I just say one thing? Just one thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think it started when you disagreed that that sperms that at the moment when the sperm cells enters the female egg, you said it was a human, and James said it wasn't. Well, genetically it is a human at that point.
Thank you. That was my point. Yes, thank you very much.
That's where you began arguing.
Okay, but
the misconception.
I honestly don't think whoever turns out to be right about this, I don't really think it matters that much. I mean, from my perspective, the conception as an event has a very important genetic and chemical significance, but I don't think it has a moral significance at all. I mean, yes, before conception it wasn't genetically a human. After conception it was. Other than that, I don't think it has any moral implications. I think it has some very interesting chemical implications. Well, so I think morally that's completely arbitrary, as compared to the slightly less arbitrary line of 24 weeks, which you could argue that because the baby starts to feel pain. Now I understand that the common objections to this is that we don't give a shit about animals that clearly feel pain at the same time, and my response to that is that that is completely irrational, and the reason it's irrational is because we are a selfish species, and that again the ideas of anthropomorphocentrism come into that. And realistically, in order for us to have complete dominance over the planet, we have to be a selfish species.
But isn't that selfishness? Isn't that justified because animals are also selfish?
Well,
if you die, if you have a dog and you die, most of the time the dog wouldn't give a shit about you, really, actually.
Well,
eat you.
Arguably, yes. I mean,
yeah,
the thing is, let's not pretend that humans are rational about this, because the punishment for killing a baby in a horrible way is obviously going to be orders of magnitude worse than killing, say, a chimpanzee.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that both of them have similar levels of intelligence and self-awareness as babies, the punishment for killing the baby is going to be orders of magnitude higher, and that's not really too rational. But the reasoning behind it is because we're humans and we sort of have an evolutionary incentive.
Bias, yeah.
Care for our own. I mean, this is. I mean,
well, I wanna just comment real quick that this is, and I'm guilty of this too. That we have a whole room here, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5 men and 1 woman, and the only people talking about abortion are the men. Helena, what is? Can you chime in and give us your opinion a little bit?
It's very, this is such a touchy subject. I think there are 2 sort of arguments. There's one about whether or not it should be legal, and then there's one about whether or not it's the right thing to do. And sometimes those 2 arguments intermingle. I mean, maybe every time. I don't know. But if you're talking about these sort of questions where there is no real definitive way to answer them, then that means that each person has to answer these difficult questions for him or herself. So to me, that would mean that you would want to make it more legal than illegal, because there are no real answers.
The benefits outweigh the
That's a good
cons.
answer.
Yeah, I agree, because it's better to have the option than not having it at all.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Well, and I've always
and really nobody wants an abortion. Really, nobody does, even if they
Exactly.
have to.
Yeah.
Thank
We,
you.
we don't do it because we want to.
And
I think
that's
a lot of
the
the time it takes credit away from women, because it's like, oh, well, if we let women just kill these babies whenever they want, they're just going to go out there and get all these abortions.
Yeah, and that's
Exactly. Well,
I mean,
that was one of the things I didn't get a chance to mention, which I'm sure Karlton would agree with me, is that the hypothetical that we were granting him, I don't think it happens hardly ever, right? Where
Right.
someone purposefully gets pregnant, and then some other thing makes them change their mind arbitrarily. I think the people that are like, come on, let's do it. Look, I'm gonna chart. Oh, it's today. It's right now. You only have 2 hours. Get in here, right? Those aren't the same people who they don't fit your analogy real well, right?
Right.
Those are so. I'm not so sure how great that analogy is. Most of the people who do want to abort, if they got pregnant on purpose, like you were saying, then it's usually something's wrong, right? And the other ones are accidental.
Right. I think
or unintentional.
To address that, Helena, I think that with two parts. First of all, there is a frightening number of people, because I have a very good friend, elderly gentleman. He's the nicest person in the world. I mean, to talk to. I mean, he is a nice person. Let me just say it that way, okay? But when you talk to him, he's a Christian. When you talk to him about abortion, he honestly, truly believes that if we legalize abortion, that women are simply going to use that as a quick and dirty method of birth control, and everybody's going to be lined up at the abortion clinic in the morning after. And when I look at that, I think that's incredibly hard for me to wrap my head around. I've never met any woman who's had an abortion or has even considered abortion for whom it was not an agonizing, painstaking, and for those that have had it, a lot of times lifelong guilt-ridden process. This is nothing that I've ever met a woman who would use this in a trivial way simply to avoid getting pregnant or being pregnant. I can't fathom that myself.
I think we can. I think there is a situation that we can have our cake and eat it. I don't think it has to be so dichotomized. I think what you're saying is basically right. There are very few occasions where people are irresponsible. And as far as I can tell, in the UK, the laws that we currently have in the UK, I basically agree with. I mean, you can get an abortion up until about the 24th week, and then after that, you can still get an abortion if the mother's at risk, or if the context demands it. For instance, if the woman didn't even know that she was pregnant, or if she was sexually assaulted. So I think one thing that's very important to take into account is the context, and also the society as well. So of course,
education.
Education is an important thing. Someone that doesn't really understand.
There's productive things that you can do, more productive things that you can do, while you've got a decent law there, but let's do other things that can reduce, the potential need for this. I mean, this isn't out that we're just putting there, for certain circumstances, but let's reduce the meaningless instances where, just because they, the teenagers, had a misunderstanding about, how to have protected sex or whatever.
Yeah, sure. And I think, actually, to give an example that is relevant, there have been situations, this is very unusual, but I'm going to give an example where perhaps the other side of the abortion laws might apply. This is extremely unusual, but it does happen. When a woman goes into pregnancy, of course, there are some certain physiological changes, and one of those is that things like muscle mass changes. And there have been instances where female athletes have got pregnant deliberately just so that they can increase their athletic performance, and then had an abortion subsequently.
Wow.
So I mean, this is an unusual circumstance, but it does happen, and that might be a case where someone knowingly and deliberately has an abortion. I mean, even in this case, I assume it was an early term abortion, so it was probably even legal. So even in this case, it's probably not even extreme enough. But
well, here's another piece to this, I guess. If you listen to the Catholic Church, and this is something I've never understood, or Christians as well, let's assume that all the arguments are valid, and let's assume that they do really want to criminalize all abortion. And let's suppose that the basis of that argument is that the fetus is a human being, or potential, however you want to word it, but that the fetus is a life, it's a human life, and that it should have all the protections of the law. And abortion at any point should be criminalized. All right, let's just assume that for an argument. Here's why I have a problem. When you talk to those people and you say, okay, let's say that that's true, and let's do that. Let's criminalize it across the board. Now, here's what I want to know. If you have a 13-year-old, okay, or 14-year-old that gets pregnant, and is afraid of mom learning or dad learning about this, right? And they get an illegal abortion, okay? They know it's against the law, but they find some doctor somewhere, somebody that's willing to do it, and they get an abortion, all right? Based on your reasons for making it illegal in the first place, it would seem to me that you would want to incarcerate that person for the rest of their life, or who knows, maybe even put them in the electric chair because they murdered somebody. But none of them want to do that. And my question is, if the fetus is a human life on par, on equal with an adult human, if they're the same thing and they require the same protection under law, then why should we take the guy who murders a 28-year-old that's out jogging and beats her to death with a club? Why should we punish him any harder than the 14-year-old girl that has an illegal abortion if they've effectively committed the same crime?
But you know that religion.
Because the law is wrong.
But you know that religious people think in absolutes. I mean, look at the Ten Commandments. I mean, the Ten Commandments are completely ridiculous. And they're ridiculous mostly because they don't take into account context. And anything that doesn't take into account context invariably ends up being ridiculous. And what you have just described is not taking into account context in the extreme, which is something that the law partially does and the religious people fully do. That they don't really seem to be able to differentiate between absolute and relative, which is, of course, some legal system you would hope that they do. I mean, of course, it isn't perfect, and the legal system does still, I would call it semi-absolute, because in some cases you can't take into account context depending on the wording of the law. But you would hope that in an ideal system you'd be able to do that.
Well, here's my last one. So, and again, it goes to the same thing, in particular the Catholic Church, because I think there was an instance like this in Brazil or something not too long ago. But if a fetus deserves the full protection of the law, and if it's in fact is a human life, right, from God, God's spirit in there, it's a human being, okay? Well, there have been, and admittedly rare, but there are instances where, for medical reasons, to go full term and to have the baby is a medical risk to the mother, and in some cases it's more than just a risk. There are some situations where the mother will in fact die. There's no options here, right? It's going to be mom or baby, but not both.
It has physical impacts, too, on 13-year-olds as well, like young girls too. But anyway, carry on. Like future impact to their life if they go through the pregnancy.
So if you have a mother and if you have a woman and she's pregnant and it's going to be mother or daughter, or mother or child, I should say, that's going to live, and they can't both survive, I find it interesting that the church and people against abortion in general, well, maybe society in general at this point, always seems to favor the mother's life. In other words, for those who will make an exception, the exception that they make is always, well, okay, abort the baby if that's the only thing that we can do to save the mother's life. But if the baby has equal status and is a human being, why do they never say, okay, kill the mother, let's let the baby live? I mean, as horrid as that sounds, you could make an argument that the mother has already had a chance at life. She's already had some life. At least she's had this, and the child has yet to experience any of it. So if I have to terminate one of the lives, let's terminate the one who's already, experienced some life and give the other one a chance.
Actually,
It
I
seems
think
to be the what. It seems to be the. It seems to be the potential, bad. What's going to happen? If in the instance where the child will live or the mother will live, if it's a case where the mother's going to die, she's going to go through a horrific experience of dying through giving birth to a child, which you can avoid by. I mean, sadly, the child won't be able to potentially live, but I mean, you're avoiding such a horrific circumstance from occurring. So, I mean, that just seems like a straightforward one for me. But
you could certainly give the mother an injection, put her to sleep, and then you could certainly give the mother an injection, put her to sleep, have us do a C-section, save the baby, and let the mother die.
Sorry, yeah, okay. Yeah, I didn't really think of that.
I mean, I don't know. Why don't we ever think that? Why don't we ever? I mean, I don't know. It's a stupid question, maybe, but why don't we ever go to that side of the equation? It seems like both sides would be equally valid if they're both human beings and they have equal value. But it seems like we always favor the mother, and will terminate the child's life, but never the other way around.
I'm surprised.
Wait, Helena. Can Helena? She started. I'm sorry. She kind of was in there.
I think it's because your hypothetical, right, only works when, in the late in pregnancy.
Sure.
Before that, the one life depends on the other.
Yes.
So there is an argument to be made, even if we grant, that the baby is human, that it's a baby, all of that, which kind of goes similar to, to me, it's somehow, and I can't quite figure out how, but it's kind of analogous to, in a reverse way, in a sort of the negative of, allowing someone to die versus killing someone in euthanasia cases. Although I haven't flushed that out.
Are we back to the railroad analogy? Okay.
Well, no, not the railroad analogy. The thing is, you can't force a parent to, for example, donate a kidney or some organ that they that a child might need. Right? The rights. You can't go that extra step. You can't force a person to take a proactive step, even if it's the parent of a child, in order to keep the child alive, or perhaps make the child come alive. So there's something different now. If we're going to grant that there's a full human there, it's something about forcing one person to give to keep the other one alive.
Well, here's the problem.
We don't do that when the child and the parent are not linked together physically.
Okay, but here's the irony that I see here, is that the very reason that many people say that the child needs protection and we should have laws against abortion is because it is unable to have a voice of its own, and it is unable to protect itself. It is dependent on others for its survival and protection, and that is the very trait that we are taking advantage of by terminating the baby, because the mother objects and the baby can't. So we're actually taking advantage of that trait to justify terminating the baby.
I mean, what you're talking about is very gut-wrenching. But
yes, I know.
To me, it's distinct. It's not the same as the argument I was badly trying to make.
It wasn't badly. I'm just being a little bit of devil's advocate here today. I'm just sort of.
I am also being
popping all over the place.
Can I say something?
Of course.
Actually, back to what you said about the church would rather want the woman to live than the baby. I actually know why this is. It's because the Bible doesn't really, it's not against abortion per se. It doesn't really mention it. The only time it mentions it is that it endorses it. I can't remember where it is, but it's something to do with a woman. She has slept with another man or something, and she has to get an abortion, and the Bible actually encourages something like that. Yes. And they say that the woman should live instead of the baby.
Right.
So it's based on nothing really. There's nowhere in the Bible where they say that abortion is wrong. I can't find it actually.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. I do.
So where do they get it from? This sanctity of life. Where do they get it from?
Well, I mean, I guess if I have to put on my Christian hat, I would presume that the answer would be along the lines of that God has created all of us, and therefore we all have value, and that it is not then fair it is no more fair for a woman to have an abortion than it is for one person to kill another adult. That baby is as much a human being and a result of God's creative endeavors as any one of us is.
Well, what do you make of the child of the you can't force a parent to give a life-saving organ to a child argument?
Restate it for me then, please.
Some people make an analogy in that the baby doesn't get extra rights. So if the baby's human, it has human rights like everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And so just like you can't force a father to donate his bone marrow to a child.
Yeah.
If the father doesn't, the child dies.
Yes.
It's analogous.
To
you
what?
Nonetheless, can't to a mother aborting.
No, it's not.
You can't force the father
right.
to sustain the life of his independent, his child.
Yep. I don't think it's analogous.
Okay, so explain how that analogy breaks down for you.
I think it breaks down. It's exactly the analogy of being on the cliff. No one can force you to dive for your partner who's falling. There's no crime in not taking that action. And if they die as a result of that fall, it's not you cannot be blamed for that. That's the father that we can't compel to donate to his child. But once you make the leap and grab the person, in other words, once you are committed.
I'm going to cut you off for a second, Karlton, because that presumes that the pregnancy was on purpose.
I am presuming that. I'm sorry.
Right, but I want you to work with the pregnancy being accidental, or even as far as as a 13-year-old girl. Look, these other more examples that are more like real life than the one you're talking about.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well,
this analogy is tough for me. I see how those two things are quite similar.
Okay.
And it's almost like just because the woman.
I don't have a problem with somebody. Well, that's why I can't make the other analogy, because I'm on your side of that fence. I think
well, I'm not.
I don't
and
have
I'm not
a
sure
problem.
I'm on that side.
Well, in other words, I think that if a woman gets pregnant, either if she's raped, or if a woman, like somebody had said earlier, honestly thought that she took her birth control this morning but really didn't and forgot, or the guy uses a condom and it breaks. Okay, there's a more reasonable example, and she does get pregnant. Okay, then I think that once other factors are considered, which somebody else had mentioned. In other words, if that person decides that, I'm too young, I'm not in a position emotionally, I'm not in a position financially, I just don't think that I'm capable of bringing a child into the world at this point in time, I don't have a problem with that child or that person saying, I think an abortion is best all around, because I don't want to bring a child into the world that I believe is going to end up suffering because of me, and I don't think that I should be obligated to suffer because of an accident that is correctable. So I don't have a problem there.
Okay.
It
seems like it didn't address. I hear you, and I know. Both of us are playing devil's advocate all around, right?
Yeah, I don't know what anybody's position is anymore.
I don't know what my position is. I'm just saying that to me there's something compelling in this analogy, and because if you do make this kind of analogy, then whether it's a human or a life, or when did it start, or when didn't it start, or anything like that, those sorts of things kind of become irrelevant. And what you're talking about is it's kind of a rights issue.
You mean the walking on the trail analogy?
No, I mean
No, I'm sorry, I'm confused.
forcing a parent to donate a piece of their body in order to save
No,
their life.
I don't think we can. I don't think you can do that. I don't. I mean, I think it's a disgrace if a parent. If I could donate a kidney to save my child, then I refuse to do it, knowing that that's going to endanger his life. I think I'm. Well, I don't even want to describe what I think I am at that point. But I don't think that legally we can compel. Now, I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking this as I'm saying it. That was my reaction. Is I don't think you can compel a parent to do that. But maybe in some legal system or in some society, I guess I could live with it if some society said, you know what, we think that parenting is such a sacred obligation and it's such an important commitment that maybe they should be able to compel a parent, as long as it's not going to take the parent's life. But if it's like a matter of a kidney, maybe they should be able to compel a parent and say, you know, we've done a search. There is no one else genetically compatible. Your child needs a new kidney. They can't stay on dialysis forever, or they're going to die. And I think maybe then you can compel and say, you're a parent. This is part of your obligation as being a parent. And maybe we can. I don't know.
Actually, that's quite interesting that you say that because in a way I would think I think it should maybe be a law that you are obligated to help your child in such a situation, because take for example in my country, if a person has a heart attack and he falls down for example in a bar, then it's my duty as a citizen to give him heart massage until an ambulance comes. If I don't do that, even though I know how to, because that's what we do in my country, then I will be. Then I will get jailed. It's illegal for me not to help him.
Is it Nikolaj, by the way?
Oh, Nikolai.
Oh, that's an I. I'm sorry, my bad.
Oh yeah.
And Nikolai, where are you located, if I can ask?
In Denmark.
In Denmark, okay.
Another way that this analogy kind of breaks down is that, well, actually, we do kind of force parents because of, you know, you can be jailed for neglect and not feeding your child and that kind of thing. So
yes,
it doesn't exactly work. But I've heard people use it, and there is something analogous there that I can't quite.
Well, what would happen if? Here's a way that I can compel you, maybe, to give a part of your body to your child. What if I tell you that your child is artificial lactose intolerant? In other words, there's no artificial nutrient that I can give your child, your newborn child, for some medical reason, but he can breastfeed. And what if you say, I refuse to breastfeed him? That's my body. That's my milk. I simply refuse to share it with my child. Could we not obligate you to do it then, or hold you accountable if that child dies?
Well, I mean, the question about whether it's legal or not is different from.
Yes, I'm sorry. Should we hold you accountable, morally accountable then, because you didn't give up part of your body and it cost your child his life?
I mean, that's a really great question. It's similar.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just a matter of scale. What's the difference between your breast milk and your kidney or your bone marrow?
Yeah, so the fact that one touches me more than my image of a man not feeling like giving his kidney, assuming it would save the life and all that.
Yes.
I wonder if that is touching on something cultural.
I don't know.
With women and mother and that kind of thing, right? Because why didn't I just go, well, Karlton, that's exactly the same as my example, right? Why did your example of breast milk give me more pause than the example of kidney, right?
Maybe it's just a guy talking about breast milk sounds funny.
No, I doubt that.
No, well, I think, I mean, I can see a little difference. I'm not being entirely fair or transparent here. I can see it as a difference in that breast milk is a renewable resource. It costs you literally nothing. There is zero risk.
Oh, you've never fed.
Well, okay, maybe not. You're right. No, I haven't.
It's actually quite exhausting.
Okay, but where I was thinking though that a kidney is a permanent thing, and
right. Yeah. There is a
and
difference
bone marrow has some risk associated with that transfer.
But I don't think that's what caused me pause, right?
But
because
no, I don't think it is for me either.
It's something about what you said about the breast milk made me pause a lot more. And
really?
I wonder if that's a cultural thing, and if that's something that's maybe what the feminists are. I don't know.
Wow. What are you thinking? No, because I think you're keeping a lot of thoughts to yourself, so I'm not really sure what you're thinking here, Helena.
I'm just saying.
Well, how did it give you pause? In what way?
It felt different from the kidney example, but I can't come up with what about it is different because ostensibly it's the same.
Oh, but it does feel different, doesn't it?
It feels different, and so I'm like, where's that difference coming from? Well, it can't be the idea that you gave that it's cost benefit thing, because that wasn't in me. So I'm going, what's this coming? This must be, perhaps this is a cultural thing that.
Maybe, or could it be from the same source that gives us that same sensation when we talk about the difference between pulling the switch on the tracks and it killing somebody versus hitting somebody on the head with a baseball bat and killing them?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps it is something like that, but I don't know.
I don't know either.
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or is it just is nurturing and breastfeeding in women? I mean, is that sort of a button that gets pushed that automatically sort of causes that type of a reaction?
I have no idea.
Well, I don't.
I just noticed that it caused me to pause more.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Sorry about that. Wow.
Any final conclusions?
My final conclusions are: I'm not breastfeeding my children. I don't care what. And sorry, Greg, you're gonna wither and die. But no, I don't know. I mean, to be honest with you, if I thought about that, there's a part of me that says, oh, I would be happy to give my kidney if my son needed it. But there's another part of me that says, I don't think I would say that quite so quickly if I actually had to make that decision in real life. I'd like to think I would eventually come to the same conclusion, but I don't think it would be quite such a snap. I don't think it would be so plain, so easy to make that. There was a Dr. House episode. I don't know if any of you saw that or followed Dr. House, but there was a Dr. House episode very, very similar to this, but with, of course, even a worse turn in it. It was parents that had a son and a daughter, okay, and the son had been in a wheelchair all of his life, if I want to get this right, and the daughter was a professional skater, or she had some extraordinary talent that made her special. And her brother was always going to be in a wheelchair. He had some sort of a spinal disorder or whatever. I don't know exactly what it was. But the only person, how did this work? I want to get this right. The daughter, now I can't remember the details. Okay, wait a minute. I can't remember the details, but it was something like the father or the mother had to decide which child to donate an organ to, and the one he didn't donate the organ to was going to die, or something like that. But it was just horribly tragic. Nobody could make this choice ever. Yeah, but it was that would be
all around. It's a really crazy hard choice.
Yes, yeah,
hopefully,
I agree.
You want to never have to be faced with it.
To be clear, next in 2 weeks' time, I will be using my iron fist. I will be a much more strict moderator, so we will not be going for 4 hours next time.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were moderating. I'm sorry, Quantum. My bad.
No, it's fine. I think we've had some really good discussions today.
Oh, we are still live. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah. I'm just rather eager to conclude now because it was supposed to be a 2-hour show. But
well, go ahead and conclude it. I mean, I think we can still stay offline and chat. We don't have to be live. Yeah, I don't care.
But yeah. The justification for this, of course, was that we had 2 Magic Sandwich shows to cover, so 2 times 2 is 4. I think at least we did cover some of it, so that's good. I mean, does anyone want to give some brief final conclusions about the show in general or whatever? Final points, anyone?
I don't have any.
I just want to say thank you. This was really something fun, and so thank you for having it.
I'll echo that sentiment. I've had a great time, and I appreciate it. And thank you for moderating this.
That's fine. So we'll be doing another one in 2 weeks' time, and it's going to be similar, except that it definitely will be 2 hours next time.
That's fine.
This is the exception rather than the rule.
That's fine.
and the topic will be conditional on what the Magic Sandwich show is this week. But we tend to use the last hour for what people want to think about anyway. So if we want to continue the abortion thing, then we can still do it next time in the last hour.
Very well.
So yeah. So thanks to everyone that's been watching and the people that are still watching. I'm really surprised that anyone is, but anyway. So I'm going to go offline now.
Okay.